One quiet evening, the guy who owned the clinic decided to read reviews about his business, and everything he read there was not very pleasant. People wrote that they would no longer come there as it was in this clinic were confirmed cases of corona infection. Such comments made the young man feel sick. He was not sober, and therefore thought that this was not why he became a doctor of Korean medicine. The guy was up to his eyeballs in debt and was able to keep afloat for less than 3 years. He also blamed it on a virus that had suddenly appeared. He was outraged that his clinic had so many confirmed cases of infection. Under the influence of alcohol, the young man climbed onto a bridge and sat on it thinking about his situation. And he didn't realize the sky was already under his feet. It was the fall into the water that changed his whole life. Then our hero could not even believe that this incident from an ordinary doctor would turn him into a divine healer from the novel. The health point system was activated. The notice said that the guy could get health points for treating internal organs, and the points earned could be spent on unlocking various skills and summoning illusory creatures. The young man lost consciousness, and opening his eyes, he noticed a silhouette in front of him. Looking at the strange man, our hero assumed that it was his rescuer who pulled him out of the Han River. In that case, the guy decided that if he didn't die, he had a chance to start over, and he thought that having a pile of debts was better than going to the other world. Getting out of bed, the boy decided he'd be more careful from now on, and when he finally came to his senses, he was shocked. Looking around, our hero could not understand where he was. The room in which he was lying was not like a hospital. Everywhere stood bulky furniture, and the guy seemed as if he was now on the set of a movie about the Middle Ages. And at that moment, our hero was approached by a man standing next to him. He called the young man, "Your Highness." The man was in tears and asked the guy if he was all right. Our hero was at a loss and did not understand what kind of foreigner was standing next to his bed, so he asked who the man was. Upon hearing this, he could not believe that the young man did not recognize him. Putting his hand on his heart, the man proudly declared that he was the lad's healer. His name was Piero Gardin. Everything that was happening seemed to our hero to be a delusion. In order to regain consciousness, the young man asked the man for water. The healer reacted quickly, and it surprised the guy even more. Piero Gardin handed him a goblet that was decorated with diamonds. Pouring water into himself, our hero even smelled that this cup smelled like real 24 times gold. After the young man looked to the side and noticed a mirror in front of him. What he saw there caused him to lose his speech. Seeing a white-haired young man there, our hero spit all the water back into the goblet. The healer was disturbed by this behavior. While the man was wiping his face with a handkerchief, the young man could not believe that the reflection was him. The only question in his mind was how it all happened. Trying to make sense of it all, our hero remembered that it was related to a novel he had read the day before he had a drink. The main character's name was Raquel Adria Magentano, and it was this person who became the guy. Immediately after this realization, the young man turned to Piero Gardin. The man looked a little confused about what was happening, but tried not to show it. And our hero's question put him in a stupor. Raquel Adria Magentano asked to slap him. The healer even turned white at such a request. He convinced himself that he had heard it. And since Piero Gardin did not react, the boy decided that he would do it himself. He swung his arm with all his might and gave himself a hard punch in the face. After a couple of seconds, his cheek turned red and he began to yelp pitifully. The man saw this and asked Raquel if he was all right. Then the young man realized that everything that was happening was not a dream. He was really the crown prince from that novel. The boy immediately remembered the huge debts and interest that remained after the collapse of his business. Joyfully throwing his hands up in the air, our hero realized that he would not have to drown in it anymore. And suddenly, his jubilation was cut short. Raquel Adria Magentano suddenly felt sick. The boy collapsed on the bed. Piero Gardin immediately jumped up to him and asked if everything was all right. Despite the fact that the young man said yes, he did not understand what happened to him. He looked at his hand and noticed that it was shaking. He also felt as if his strength was completely gone. And our hero noticed that this body was much weaker than the one he had at the age of 40. Again, the question arose in his mind how such a thing was possible. He remembered that in the first half of the novel's narrative, the Crown Prince was a supporting character who appeared for a moment. Raquel Adria Magentano in the book was a man who had been accustomed to bed from a young age, and at the age of 22, he dies. After that, our hero decided to ask the healer a question. He asked how old he was this year. The man dutifully replied that Raquel was 21 years old. As soon as the boy heard this, a small shiver ran through his body. It made his teeth clench. Our hero realized that he only had 1 year left. Raquel Adria began to reflect when everything went wrong. The young man tried to understand at what point he became a minor character in the novel. A few minutes ago, the boy was glad he was crown prince and could now forget about his debts. And now everything collapsed and he found out that he had only 1 year to live. The crown prince had certainly received all sorts of medical services in this world. However, it was not enough, and so the young man received countless blessings from priests. But even so, Raquel could not overcome the disease and died. In this case, the young man realized that he had only one option left. Going to the mirror and seeing himself there, our hero turned to Piero Gardin. The healer responded immediately. Then our hero said that he had something to do and asked him to bring needles. Also, Raquel Adria Magentano added that the size does not matter, and the main thing is to have as many needles as possible. The young man was determined to protect his body. After a while, the boy was sitting in his bed. He was trying to figure out what was wrong with his body. The young man put 2 fingers on his wrist and felt a pulse. He remembered that there were 10 abnormal pulses. Our hero realized that if he had even one of them, then he would be full of internal damage, and such a life seemed very hard for him. At that moment, Piero Gardin entered the room. The healer brought a lot of needles as instructed. The boy praised him and asked him to spread it all out on the bed. Looking at the many sharp objects, Raquel took one of them and immediately remembered those times from the club. He then walked over to the candle and began to warm the needle tip. Watching what was happening, the man asked the young man what he was going to do with the needles now. In response, our hero smiled and said that he wanted to prick his body a little. As soon as Piero Gardin heard this, he threw himself at the boy's feet and began to weep. The man begged Raquel Adria not to hurt himself and to calm down. He said that the young man should inherit the throne. The healer added that he understood how difficult it was for the crown prince, but it was not worth hurting himself. Such lectures made the boy roll his eyes. And not wanting the man to continue this, Raquel decided to calm him down. He said it's not what he imagined. The guy said he had a good reason for that. Continuing to warm up the needle, our hero said that if nothing happens after what he did, Piero Gardin would have to trust his decisions. It was obvious that the healer didn't really want to agree with this development, but in the end, he didn't stop the young man and decided to trust him. Taking off his shirt, Raquel Adria asked the man not to worry too much as he would not regret his actions. The first needle, our hero decided to target the respiratory system. And before he could do anything, he had to breathe. And to do this, the starting point was the 12 meridians. The young man knew that the meridian most related to the lungs was the Tai Yin lung meridian. After that, the hot needle went to the right place. The boy was immediately visited by an unpleasant pain. He thought that the sensation would be lighter, but since the needle was large, it probably stung more. And as a chain, all these sensations went from the center point to the point on the collarbone, and finally to the point in the upper part of the arm. Thus, the guy's eyes glowed a bright blue color. A notification appeared that the young man's orgasm was responding positively to his acupuncture techniques. The system also notified that our hero's internal organs had partially recovered their function. A couple of seconds later, Raquel Adria Magentano's lungs began to function properly again. At this point, his respiratory organs even began to dance. After that, a notification reappeared stating that the guy got 2 thumbs up from the lungs and they gave him 100 health points. Looking at this message, our hero was puzzled. He just looked at the message and didn't understand anything. Noticing the strange behavior of Crown Prince Piero Gardin, decided to ask him what happened. And Raquel at this moment was waving his hands in front of him and panikedly asked what the status window in front of him was. This made tears appear in the healer's eyes again. He felt very sorry for the crazy prince and realized that there was nothing that could be done about it. Taking the next needle in his hands, the young man calmed Piero Gardin and said that he was not mad. Our hero again asked the healer to stop worrying. Seeing that the boy again directs the needle to his body, the man asked him if he would do it again. In response, Raquel said that it was okay. As soon as a new needle appeared in his body, the system said that the young man had accurately performed acupuncture on the Unmun point. From that, the heaviness in his chest began to go away. At this pace, the young man acupunctured his body, which was very burning. Our hero certainly did not suspect that the pain would be so unpleasant. Meanwhile, the healer sat on the sidelines praying for the prince. The man asked God to have mercy on His Royal Highness, the Prince of the House of Magentano. He wanted the young man's mania to be cured as soon as possible and healed. But now it seemed to him that while Raquel was stabbing his body and going crazy, he would lose his mind along with him. Looking at the agitated Piero Gardin, our hero said nothing and decided to continue his occupation. So the young man pricked his whole arm on the right points. The system said that the guy's skillful acupuncture technique stimulated many points. It seemed that the young man's lungs were comfortably relaxing in the massage chair at this moment. Gritting his teeth, Raquel Adria didn't understand what these comparisons meant and was resentful that he wasn't given health points right now. Finally, it was time for the Shao Shan point. Thus, the left lung meridian acupuncture procedure was successfully completed. The system said that now our hero's lungs were tap dancing with joy. They were dancing so hard that it made one man feel uncomfortable and look very exhausted. He sensed that lung was making a lot of noise. And in front of Raquel's face, there was a notice that the rhythm of the tap dance had awakened the large intestine, which was in the GI department. At that moment, Lung's dance was interrupted. However, the large intestine came in. outraged that he had been forgotten. After that, their dance continued. The system said that the guy's intestines were now making nice rhythmic waves. It also added that it gave 100 health points to the young man, and his lungs at the same time gave him 200 health points. In addition, our hero learned from the system that his health level had reached the threshold for opening skills. This surprised him very much. Raquel Adria thought that his skills would be like in games where swinging a sword releases his aura or shooting fire from a staff after casting a spell. Of course, the guy wanted to familiarize himself with the list of abilities and clicked the appropriate button. A list of abilities that he used to earn his living was opened in front of him. This made the young man smile. He understood that any treatment starts with a precise diagnosis. In his previous life, his name was Li Han. He knew that only with an accurate diagnosis could the right treatment and medication be prescribed. So to begin with, our hero decided to choose the skill of listening to the pulse. Now, by measuring the target's pulse, the young man could get a general idea of her health, and all the data could be checked in the basic health check report. In that case, Raquel Adria decided to feel his pulse once again. The pulse reading was run. The report stated that the guy was SS class trash, and his estimated life expectancy was 91 days. Such news disappointed the young man. He certainly expected something like this, but did not think that this body had only 3 months to live. Our hero thought it was even less than a cell phone contract, but Raquel wasn't going to give up and die so easily. According to the acupuncture needle insertion method, the needle should be rotated clockwise, and according to the breathing support method, the needle is withdrawn during exhalation. That's how the young man got the last needle in him. The system said that the boy's life expectancy increased by 1 day. From this news, Raquel Adria Magentano was shocked. He was surprised that his life expectancy was now 92 days. So the guy decided to try to do the same thing on the other side, but suddenly his mouth started bleeding. The system said that our hero's body was overstressed by the excessive acupuncture. It added that with Raquel's current training, he should have had this procedure every 3 days. Piero Gardin was horrified by what he saw, but the young man still agreed with the system's advice. His body was completely devastated. Raquel realized that stimulating nerves and blood vessels required physical conditioning of the body. But right now, our hero's body was in a state of ultra-low health. The last message had convinced the guy that acupuncture was effective. The problem was that Raquel's body was weak. He needed at least 3 days to recover from 1 acupuncture session. So our young man wondered what would happen if he had a session every 3 days. After calculating everything, Raquel Adria realized that he could delay his departure to the other world for about a month. But even that wasn't enough for him. In the end, the young man was going to die anyway, so our hero decided to find a more effective method. Thinking briefly, he came to the fact that the fastest and surest way was consumables, and from this, the guy realized that he needed tonics. Hearing this, Piero Gardin again decided to ask if his crown prince was all right. At that moment, Raquel turned to the man with a disgruntled face and said that he would have a request for him. Stammering, the healer said that everything was at his service. Then our hero asked if the man had more powerful ingredients in his pantry. This question slightly confused the healer, and he asked the young man what he meant. Raquel said he needed poisonous ingredients. Piero Gardin replied that he had such. The man also wanted to try to talk the boy out of it, but our hero was too obsessed with his idea. The young man clapped his hands and with a smile on his face asked the healer if he had aconite root. He stammered and said that although they didn't have a main palace, they had various supplies in their storeroom. This was because it was the crown prince's residence. After that, our hero rather folded his arms and asked Piero Gardin to bring him this root. However, the man was not in too much of a hurry to fulfill the young man's request. He asked, with all due respect to him, why he needed it. Then Raquel Adria smiled even more strangely and licked his lips and said that he would eat the component. Such an answer shocked the healer. He clutched his head in horror and didn't know what to say. After a couple of minutes, Piero Gardin fell to his knees and began to beg the crown prince not to do this. He asked how the young man could ask him to help him in his destruction. But our hero calmed him down and told him that it was all necessary for healing. The guy asked the man not to talk nonsense and to bring what he requires within 5 minutes. In addition, Raquel Adria said that if he was late, he could really go to the other side. With tears in his eyes and a pitiful look, the healer wanted to dissuade the young man from this venture. Looking at the young man sighed heavily and realized that he could not do it that way. So he asked Gardin if he knew that aconite root was poisonous. The man said yes and added that that was why it was used as a poison. And then Raquel explained that aconite has 2 types of root. Among them was the one the young man wanted to eat. To be precise, it was a small root called aconitum. But as for its main ingredient, aconitine, it could stop the heart. And Piero Gardin was well aware of that. The boy also had that information. Smiling broadly, he said that he knew how to neutralize and control this poison. In short, Our hero could easily turn a poisonous herb into a medicinal herb. Hearing this, the healer didn't understand how such a thing was possible. Repeating what his crown prince had just said, it was as if he was trying to make sense of the words. And Raquel told him that in the language of the East, this process is called pharmaceutical processing. When processed, the toxicity of aconitum can be used for medicinal purposes. The young man then asked the man if he had succeeded in convincing him of the usefulness of this root. But Piero Gardin said no. This made our hero's face crease. The healer said that he had never heard anything of the kind and did not know whether the source from which the boy had learned about it could be trusted. But hand on heart, Gardin said that if it would benefit his highness, he would bring him the wolf root as he had ordered. Such a gesture on this part of the man astonished our hero, and he did not even know what to say to him in response. In the end, Piero Gardin went to the pantry to get the root. Day after day, the crown prince's health deteriorated. The healer even became desperate because no medication was working. It was for this reason that he decided to try this pharmaceutical treatment. Digging in his drawers after a while, Piero Gardin found the right component. At this point, the man clearly decided that as soon as the process was complete, he would personally make sure the drug was safe before the crown prince consumed it. A short time later, the aconitum root medicine stood before a joyous Raquel Adria. The healer was also present there and noticed that the liquid smelled very strange. The boy realized that Gardin was still doubting this venture and the man confirmed it. Nervously swallowing saliva, he reminded the young man that it was all made from a poisonous plant. Unable to contain his emotions, Piero Gardin again began to beg the guy not to do it. From such a surprise, Raquel even twitched. In that case, the guy smiled and told the man if he was so worried he could try the medicine first. And it was as if Piero Gardin had been waiting for those words all along. The physician gladly agreed to try the medicine first. And our hero was very surprised at that moment. He did not expect his assistant to agree so quickly. A little thinking, the guy remembered that Gardin, in fact, in the novel has always been loyal and faithful. However, the man had not originally been Raquel's personal physician. He had started out as an assistant attending physician. Although, at first, many doctors were enthusiastic with time, they all left anyway. Gardin stayed by the prince's side until the end. Perhaps he was just that kind of man. In the end, responsibility for the death of Raquel Adria Magentano fell on Gardin, and he was executed. Observing the man, our hero became convinced that only in this way the essence of a man becomes more obvious. The young man said to himself that such devotion as the healer had for him was admirable, and he wanted to hope that the man would do well. But smiling wryly, the boy said that no matter how noble Piero Gardin was, he would not be able to share this medicine even with him. With joy in his eyes, Raquel Adria looked at the plate with the decoction of ephedra aconite and asarum. At that moment, the healer turned to the crown prince and asked if he could drink it already. Then the boy said importantly that he understood that the man was eager to taste the medicine, but that he still had to wait a little longer. The young man added that this decoction should be taken chilled. After that, Piero Gardin thought for a while and asked our hero how he knew about this medicine. And then, the young man remembered that the healer was loyal to Raquel. Our hero realized that if the man finds out that he was not the crown prince, there will be problems. So the boy decided to make something up. He naively told the healer that every night a magician came to him and took pity on him and gave him the secret. So Piero Gardin realized that Raquel was lying to him. To the boy, however, he told the opposite. Then the man covered his face with his hand and said that this medicine looked too suspicious. But the boy didn't even answer the healer and rushed to the bowl with the potion. In a few seconds, Raquel drank the entire contents of the pot. Piero Gardin was shocked to see this. Then our hero turned to the man with a satisfied smile and confirmed that he drank every drop. And at that moment, he sensed something big was coming. The system said that the young man drank the perfect decoction that helped relieve the symptoms of cold and pain. It added that there was now an awakening of the heart energy technique. However, Raquel didn't quite understand what that meant. Then the system explained that this technique was created over 300 years ago by the legendary knight Xavier Azrahan. The nobleman he served, Lloyd Fronter, was also involved in the creation. This technique is passed down exclusively to a direct descendant of the Magentano royal family. And since the original owner of this body was the crown prince, it was likely that he inherited Azrahan's method as a child. So a circle was created around the boy's heart that processed and amplified the mana he absorbed. The mana amplification was 120% and required 1,000 points to level up. Our hero only had 100. At this moment, Raquel felt as if a smooth donut was spinning around his heart. He also felt a surge of vitality spilling over his body. Stretching his arms forward and clenching his fists, our hero realized that this was the mana. The young man rejoiced at this development. What was happening seemed incredible to him. But suddenly the plate fell out of his hands and shattered. The boy sharply grabbed his heart as it seemed to him that it was about to burst. He realized that it was the circle that surrounded his heart. Piero Gardin, standing nearby, was very worried about his crown prince. The healer looked at our hero with horror and did not know how to help him. The system told Raquel that the mana circle was putting excessive pressure on his heart. This scared the guy. The system also added that the balance between the mana circle and the heart was out of balance, which in turn could lead to his heart stopping. Sweating, our hero didn't realize what was happening, but despite this, he assumed that the mana circle and the heart do not match in size. After all, Raquel, who had been weak since childhood, had no time to train his mana circle. Therefore, this circle was like a mismatched ring. It just squeezed the young man's heart. And if that was really the case, our hero, taking after his chest, decided that he had one solution to this. Since the guy couldn't shrink his heart, he was going to widen the circle. Running mentally to his heart, Raquel grabbed the ring and started to increase the mana spinning speed. He wanted to make his heart go wild. However, it wasn't that easy. After a few minutes, the young man already wanted to give up. But our hero didn't do that, as he realized that compared to the collapse he had suffered in Korea, it wasn't that painful. The guy remembered that in his other life, the reputation of his clinic plummeted due to rumors that it was infected with COVID. Clients had disappeared overnight. On top of that, the young man's hair began to fall out. The landlord kept deducting loan interest from the rent. So the guy had to move into a small studio apartment, struggling to make ends meet. These thoughts made Raquel furious. He started pulling the ring on himself as hard as he could. Our hero said not to underestimate business owners in South Korea. After that, the guy let go of the ring, and it became much wider than before. At that moment, our hero regained consciousness. In front of him sat a worried Piero Gardin, and the young man saw the notification about the system, which said that thanks to the increased stimulation, the heart had awakened with renewed vigor. In Raquel Adria Magentano's body, something was about to happen, for the king of it all had returned. The heart of a boy came on stage. In the audience were his lungs and large intestine. Lungs chuckled that the wretched man had returned to a miserable place. But in the end, they were all happy to see each other. Watching this, our hero, with a smile on his face, apologized to the organs for his shabby body. But suddenly, his face changed to a more serious one. The system said that the development of the heart and mana circle was perfectly balanced. From this, Raquel became the first person in history to receive mana circle slots. This didn't tell the young man anything, and he assumed that these slots looked like an item games. Our hero then abruptly got to his feet, and with this action he gave Piero Gardin a big scare. The man did not expect that the prince, who had just been lying down, would become so energetic in an instant. The healer told him that he just looked like he was in a lot of pain. He asked the guy if it was a side effect of the medicine. Then Raquel said he just choked. Putting his hands around his neck, our hero wanted to show him how it was, but the man asked him not to because it looked very dangerous. Looking at the broken plate, Piero Gardin regretfully said that he had to drink the medicine himself. Hearing this, Raquel asked him if he really wanted to drink the poison. Without waiting for an answer, the young man said that in that case he would give the man the opportunity next time. The healer then waved the man away and said that he didn't mean it. Then Piero Gardin rushed to the plate, as our hero had asked him to clean the room. Turning back to the bed, the lad thanked the man and said he would go and rest. This surprised the healer even more. He assumed that Raquel was now even more sick, and our hero smilingly asked Gardin not to take into his head what he didn't hear. Putting his hand on his heart, the young man said that if his guesses were correct, then he may have gotten something incredible. Mana slots is a technique that stores materials by mixing them with mana. Raquel understood that each slot held 10 liters. Storage was accomplished by ingestion. In other words, whatever our hero consumed could be stored. Getting out of bed, the young man decided to check it out. A jug standing on the dresser immediately caught his eye. It was filled with water, and the guy decided that it would be perfect for such an experiment. There was about 2 liters in the jug. The term average lethal dose was appropriate, where 50% of the subjects were killed when the substance was administered. Simply put, the probability of death was 50%. Even if the person survived, he could get serious diseases or turn into a vegetable. So the guy calculated that at a body weight of 60 kilograms, the maximum dose for drinking plain water was 5.4 tenths of a liter. And at his weight, this figure was about 3.9 tenths of a liter. Raquel then decided to lift the jug, and it was not easy for him. His body was very weak. And after that, our hero began to absorb the water from the carafe. At this point, he said to himself that he wanted to save the water he was drinking. Then the system showed a notification that one slot was full. So the guy realized that the experiment had succeeded, but Raquel was still hungry and wondered if he should drink more water. After a while, there were 4 more empty jugs on the dresser. The young man drank 10 liters and was surprised that nothing had changed. Then our hero decided to use 0.1 tenth of a liter of water. His slot was emptied by exactly that amount, and the guy was happy about it. He proudly declared that he was like a human version of a camel. Raquel Adria could easily release any amount of water. Now that the lad had the basics figured out, he wanted to use herbal infusions. However, the young man didn't understand what to do with the water now. He knew that if he released the entire water supply, it would lead to instant death. Staring diligently at the floor, Raquel Adria suddenly had an epiphany. He remembered a technique. It was called Asrahan's technique, and it specialized in absorbing and consuming mana. In this case, the guy decided to take advantage of the consumption and amplification. Raquel was determined to release mana outwards instead of inside his body. In a matter of seconds, the young man first amplified it and later discharged it. Energy formed in his palm. This meant that his plan had worked. Now it was up to our hero to put it in the bottle. Carefully and slowly, the young man directed this stream into the decanter in front of him. As soon as the energy reached the decanter, it immediately glowed and began to crack. Raquel didn't understand what was happening. The water behaved strangely. Our hero was surprised. He realized that this should not have happened and thought that the water would flow like a tap. Continuing to stand still, the guy was amazed that there was some kind of water cannon. At that moment, footsteps were heard outside the door of the prince's room. At the sound of the broken jug, all the guards came running. First among them stood Piero Gardin. He ran up to the lad as excited as usual and asked if he was all right. The man began to go through all the options of what happened and thought that it was some kind of terrorism, but our hero calmed him down and said it wasn't. And then the guy realized that now he would have to think of something. Rubbing the back of his head, he started generating excuses. In the end, the story was that Raquel got a little angry, and in an impulse, he banged the water jug on the table. Smiling at his subordinates, the young man apologized for what happened. However, the man from the guard and Piero Gardin looked at each other strangely. Naively smiling, our hero realized that they did not believe him. In fact, he had a very pathetic excuse. But after a minute, the man from the guard bowed to the young man and asked if he was hurt. Raquel was confused at first and then said he had a small cut on his leg. The boy was amazed that his story was believed. The man then turned to the healer and asked him to escort the boy to the second bedroom. Garden said he would do so as soon as he had treated the prince's wounds. Our hero realized that his excuse was contentedly strange, but despite this, he was believed. After a while, the healer bandaged the young man's leg and carried him on his shoulders to the bedroom. Partly, Raquel realized that it was probably because he was a prince. As soon as the boy lay down on the bed, the man asked him to get a good night's rest. Our hero assumed that this was one of the privileges of royalty. Then he turned to Piero Gardin and said that he too should rest. After a while, the young man lay alone on the bed and examined his hand. He thought about what had happened to the jug and to him. It was like a flow of mana, coming from his heart circle to his veins, rushing through his shoulders and arms, intensifying, and when released, resulting in an explosion. For Raquel Adria Magentano, it was an intriguing and impressive sensation. After that, the guy decided that he should get some sleep before creating more problems. He wanted to experiment thoroughly, and while the young man was in ignorance of his strange behavior, a very important person found out about it. It was Emperor Asterion Testarossa Magentano. The man kneeling before him told how our hero mutilated himself with needles and took a poisonous potion. Such news made the emperor very angry, and with burning eyes, he wished to know what purpose the lad was pursuing. The next morning, Piero Gardin and Raquel stood in the kitchen in front of a huge pot. The young man looked at the 10 liters of decoction of ephedra aconite and asarum with a satisfied face. He then shifted his gaze to the healer and asked if he could leave the room for a moment. And of course, Garden had a question as to why he would do so. Our hero thought to himself at that moment that if the man now saw him drinking it all in one gulp, he would faint. And the guy told Garden that he only needed 1 minute to do something. Squinting slightly, the healer looked at the crown prince and asked if he would drink it again. The man recalled how the young man had suffered the last time. Raquel, however, insisted that he had simply choked then. Piero Gardin nevertheless said that he was very worried because this time they had made more potion. The boy then said that he had something to check and would drink only a little of it. The young man added that he just didn't want the man who worked on the preparation of the potion to watch him waste it. That flattered the healer, and our hero's words convinced Piero Gardin that only a madman would do such a thing. They started laughing together afterwards. But Raquel Adria Magentano quickly calmed down, unlike his assistant. With a serious face, he looked at the healer, and after a second, he kicked him out of the room. Then the guy calmly walked to the table where there was a pot of decoction and decided that it was time to start his experiment. Picking up this huge pot, the young man began to absorb all the contents. As a result, our hero's slots began to fill up and the pot was completely empty. Raquel felt very good and decided that slowly, we should now use these liters. Continuing to live his royal life, the guy spent on himself 0.1 of a liter. Such actions of the young man were approved by his saved organs, and for this, they gave him health points. Adding up all the points, Raquel calculated that he had 500 health points. But that wasn't enough, as he wanted to increase his life expectancy. Meanwhile, his heart and large intestine were in the same room. They were discussing what they had on today's menu. With a satisfied face, the large intestine replied that their diet included a decoction of ephedra aconite and a sarum. Then Heart asked what they would have for breakfast tomorrow, and large intestine suggested that it would be the same decoction again. He also added that they would probably have the same dinner. From these words, Heart's face looked very gloomy. At this moment, a notification appeared in front of our hero that his organs were already vomiting from the decoction. With a not very satisfied look, the young man thought about the fact that those should drink what they were given. And after that, the guy again used 0.1 of a liter of the medicine. After a while, he sat at the table and ate the usual food. Suddenly, a notification from the system appeared in front of his face that his life expectancy had increased by 50 days. The young man's estimated duration now consisted of 133 days. Upon hearing this, Raquel abruptly stood up from the table with joy. A sharp noise startled the assistant standing next to him so much that her teacup fell out of her hands. Seeing this, the guy smiled at the girl and apologized for being so harsh. Then the assistant, with a guilty look, bowed to the prince and began to apologize for what happened. Looking at her, our hero was surprised that she apologized for the broken mug, and the assistant continued to stand with her arms folded. Tears even seemed to well up in her eyes. So Raquel wanted to reassure her and told her that everything was fine. Then he asked the girl if she had hurt herself. This made the assistant suddenly squeal. The girl in one breath began to apologize to the guy and said that it would not happen again. Her whole body was trembling, and she begged the prince not to be her whip like last time. Outside, our hero smiled at the girl and asked if he had ever done such a thing before. And inside, he was squeezed and hoped that she would say no. And as soon as the assistant answered in the negative, the guy easily exhaled. But it was a hasty action because after the girl said that Raquel had never done it personally. With indignation, the boy asked if he had ordered someone else to hit her. The assistant said that she had spilled water on his sleeve a couple of times. Then the thought slipped into our head that the crown prince was some kind of monster. So the guy sat down on the bed and told the assistant to clean up the room. That was the end of her tasks for today. Hearing this, the girl looked happily at Raquel Adria and thanked him. Then she turned sharply towards the exit and left. Looking after the assistant, the young man noticed that she looked as if she had just got out of prison. He turned to Piero Gardin standing in front of him and decided to ask him something. The lad told the man that his memory had been hazy lately and he wanted to know how he had been to his maids and other servants. And just as the healer was about to begin his narrative, our hero warned him that if he flattered him, he would drink all the poison before his eyes. Such a statement knocked Piero Gardin out of his element. He realized that he could not get away and told everything as it was. After our hero found out what a tyrant Raquel was, he was horrified. He didn't understand why the crown prince behaved the way he did. From this, the young man realized why everyone believed him when he made that strange excuse about the jug. Raquel realized that he had been crazy from the beginning. Then he decided to go to the healer again and asked why he wasn't afraid of him. It seemed to the guy that the man was the closest and probably suffered the most, but Garden said it was because he trusted the prince. This surprised the young man. Then the healer added that he just knew what Raquel Adria Magentano was really like. At that moment, the man remembered a situation from the past when, in rainy weather, he found the little prince in the yard. The boy was sitting near a tree and holding a little chick in his hands. He wanted to warm it with his warmth. In the present, Piero Gardin put his hand on his heart and told our hero that he hoped that the cure of the disease would bring him back to the present. The man added that this faith had recently begun to bear fruit. In response, the boy smiled and thanked the healer. Raquel Adria then offered Gardin to eat a yummy treat as a reward. The man wanted to somehow refuse it, but the crown prince insisted. And at that moment, our hero made a vow to himself that he would not let himself be killed. He was determined to survive. Suddenly, a servant came running into his room. He was very agitated about something. With a heavy breathlessness, he said that His Majesty the Emperor had summoned the boy for an audience. The young man did not expect such a thing and was therefore very surprised. After a while, Raquel Adria showed up at the Emperor's office in perfect order. Bowing before the man, the boy introduced himself and said that he welcomed the rightful ruler of this land. In response, Asterion Testarossa Magentano only gave a grudging chuckle, but a little later his face changed to one of surprise. Looking at the young man, he saw the energy of Asrahan's heart. The man couldn't understand where the frail Raquel had gotten that from. Our hero noticed that the emperor was very nervous in his presence, and he assumed he was wrong about him. Raquel continued to stand on one knee, and his legs were already starting to go numb. All he wanted was for Asterion Testarossa to say something so he could finally stand up. The man then asked him how the crown prince's life in the palace was going. The boy said yes and wondered if they would talk while he was on his knees. Asterion then hummed again and said that if he believed what they were saying, he was aware that the lad was hurting himself. The emperor added that he knows how he stabs himself with needles and drinks poison. This statement made Raquel Adria stammer. He did not know what to say. Then Asterion Testarossa spoke for him. The man called the guy a fool and added that he was still a descendant of the royal family. He said that our hero is a proud representative of the royal family and should not lose his dignity. The man continued talking and asked if the boy could not bear the burden of royal duties because of his blood condition, should he not make a reasonable decision. This dumbfounded the young man. He realized that this meeting had an ulterior motive on the part of the emperor. Asterion Testarossa then said that he would not beat around the bush. The man stated that he wanted the prince to cede the throne to his younger brother, the second prince. This made Raquel Adria speechless. At first, he didn't even realize what the emperor had just asked him to do. But after a couple of seconds, the guy apologized to his majesty and said that he would refuse such an offer. This answer did not please the man very much. He abruptly stood up from his throne and asked indignantly how he dared to contradict him. Without a moment's hesitation, the young man said yes. Our hero realized that the pressure from the emperor was strong, but he should not have been afraid of it. And for him, it was obvious why the man behaved so. First of all, Asterion did not need to get the boy to agree to the transfer of rights to the throne. The reason for such beliefs was that the man does not want his firstborn son to graciously cede his position to his younger brother willingly. Also, Asterion wants his younger brother to be recognized as someone who deserves to inherit the right to the imperial throne. Continuing to think this way, our hero considered it a good political advertisement, and even though the guy was still weak, he was by no means going to give up. Looking at the emperor, Raquel Adria realized that he was probably very nervous. After that, the man started to move towards the young man and asked him if he didn't appreciate his attention. He also asked the boy if the illusory title of crown prince was so important to him. The emperor continued to question our hero and asked if he would be satisfied only after he had dishonored him and the entire imperial family. Then the guy realized that he had never even considered something like the imperial throne. Of course, he would gladly pass the title to the second prince or whoever and just enjoy life. However, there was another side to the coin. The guy realized that if remade by a man's proposal, then this country would fall, and it would all be the fault of the second prince. In the novel Demon Sword Emperor, the second prince was considered diligent and capable, but the age of battle was approaching, and so he was not the right monarch for such times. Our hero was convinced that if the second prince ascends to the throne, the empire and the imperial family will end. The boy decided he had to do something to stop it. Getting up from his knees, the young man said that he was indeed sick and weak. But despite this, he said that he had not lost his mind or wisdom. Raquel also said that the title of crown prince was not that important to him. All he cared about was the prosperity of the empire and its well-being. Asterion seemed to believe these words. The man stated that our hero's words seemed plausible, but the young man corrected him and said that it was not about words at all. Then the crown prince added that he had a proposal for the emperor. Hearing this, the man was surprised. Putting his hand on his heart, the young man asked to give him a chance to prove which of the two of them, he or the second prince, would be able to bear the burden of the crown. After a while, our hero returned to his room. There he was met by Gardine, who wanted to know what his majesty had told him. He smiled and said that it was nothing important and added that he just wanted him to pass the title to the second prince. This made the healer cringe. He stared at the young man with wide-open eyes and mouth and did not know what to say. Seeing this reaction of the man, Raquel Adria asked him not to worry as he refused. The boy also added that the emperor offered him a sword fight with the second prince. At that moment, our hero turned to the man and his smile disappeared abruptly. He asked the healer what he was doing, and the man was sitting on the floor with a suitcase and said he was packing. He said it was time to get ready to leave. This was something the young man didn't expect. Meanwhile, Asterion Testarossa was looking out the window and thinking about what Raquel Adria had suggested. The window showed this castle of the crown prince, and looking at it, the man tried to remember if there was such a trait in the young man's character. And not thinking long, he decided to do as the boy suggested. At this moment, our hero and Piero Gardine were fighting over the suitcase. The guy convinced his assistant that he will win and do not need to go anywhere, but that was not sure. After a while, the day of the duel between Raquel and the second prince came. In the crowd of spectators were two girls who were crazy about the beauty of Prince Theodore. They could not even imagine how beautiful his victory would be. Our hero at this moment was warming up and suddenly a shadow appeared on his body. A second prince named Theodore Palermo Magentano approached him. He told the young man that he shouldn't do this. Putting his hand on his heart, the young man asked if our hero knew how it would end. Raquel Adria did not like this question and asked the second prince if he was so sure that he would defeat him. Theodore replied that the emperor had reported to him that our hero had proposed a duel. He added that it was all to give him more legitimacy to the throne. When our hero heard this, he thought it was nonsense. Theodore went on to say that the result was already known in advance and he couldn't bear to see our hero sacrificing his health for such a cause. The guy thought that the young man should not have made such sacrifices. From these words, a smile appeared on Raquel Adrian's face. He realized that both the prince and the emperor were wrong. And despite this speech of the second prince, the boy extended his hand to Piero Gardin, who had a shield. From such a gesture, everyone around him was shocked. Theodore didn't even know how to react to it and just flapped his eyes at the crown prince. Then, with shield in hand, Raquel Adria apologized to him and said that he did not intend to lose. There was talk in this crowd that our hero was strange. After all, Theodore possessed Azrahan's energy and even took swordsmanship lessons from the famous knight. People said that the crown prince had no chance of winning, and while everyone was discussing what was happening, Piero Gardin looked at Raquel and remembered their recent conversation. Sometime before the battle, the healer had watched the young man prepare for the duel. The boy was determined to win. The man tried to dissuade him, but our hero said that nothing was expected of him especially, and therefore he should stress less. In this case, stammering Garden said to believe in his highness, but the guy realized that he was lying and did not even blush. Then the young man said that if he could block 3 attacks of the second prince, he could win. So now with his hands folded and his eyes closed, the healer prayed that his crown prince would win. After that, the emperor spoke. He said that they were gathered here today to determine who was most fit to ascend the throne. All the townspeople listened attentively to the man. Asterion Testarossa began to talk about the rules. He said that if Raquel survived 5 minutes after the battle started or defeated the second prince, he would win. Otherwise, the emperor said that Theodore Palermo Magentano would win. Now that the rules had been announced, the battle could begin. The second prince wanted it over with as soon as possible. The battle began. However, suddenly our hero let go of his sword from his hands. Such an action surprised everyone around him. None of them understood what was happening. Some of them even assumed that the battle was over. Theodore noticed this and asked Raquel if he was giving up, and the young man thought to himself that it was a relief, as he felt uncomfortable pointing his sword at an unhealthy man. The second prince also thought it was a terrible shame for the imperial family to surrender in front of so many people. This made him question whether he should convince our hero to continue fighting or not. The guy was just floundering in his contrary thoughts. And suddenly, Raquel Adria, who had just thrown away his sword, put his shield in front of him. Then Theodore Palermo assumed that his opponent had chosen defense tactics instead of clumsy attacks. He realized that he was going to hold out for 5 minutes instead of defeating him. A smile appeared on the second prince's face. The boy decided that he would end this duel as soon as possible. Closing his eyes, Theodore used Azrahan's energy. A red aura appeared around him. Gathering his strength, the prince rushed towards our hero and in a matter of seconds was next to him. Watching Asterion Testarossa, saw that the second prince was attacking the other prince using his body mass, strength, and mana. The man was sure that the shield would not withstand such an onslaught. And at that moment, Theodore struck at Raquel. There was a peculiar aura emanating from our hero as well. Theodore only wished he hadn't fallen and made a mockery of himself. He wanted Raquel to kneel with dignity in case of defeat. That's why Theodore struck from above. Meanwhile, our hero smiled back at his opponent and stayed on his feet. Then the second prince was surprised. He could not believe that the young man had just repelled his attack or even dodged it. The crowd of spectators whispered again. Everyone was amazed that the boy had blocked the second prince's blow. Emperor Asterion was as perplexed as everyone else, and even jumped up from his throne a little from such feelings. After a couple of seconds, people calmed down a bit and thought that Theodore Palermo was just holding back in his attacks and the young man was lucky. However, the prince himself did not think so. Looking at our hero, he realized that it was not an accident. Therefore, already angry from this, Theodore Palermo with new forces rushed at the young man and hit his shield. The confrontation between the two princes was powerful, but at one point Raquel Adria could not withstand such an onslaught and flew aside. Seeing this, Piero Gardin was very worried about his crown prince and shouted to him. As he landed near the fence, the young man felt his head start to spin and the wrist on which the shield was held was numb. But despite this, Raquel Adria remembered how when he was a policeman he blocked anything. Therefore, the guy took what was happening as nothing. After that, covering his body with his shield, the young man rushed towards the second prince. While Theodore was trying to break through Raquel's defense, our hero thought that he was much better at absorbing mana than he expected. So afterwards, he smiled and thought to himself that it was to his advantage. Looking at the satisfied face of his opponent, Theodore didn't know what he was up to and shouted that he was finished anyway. Then, the second prince jumped into the air, and from that height he was going to throw himself at Raquel. Then, there was a loud clang as sword and shield made contact. Our hero stood confidently on his feet and said that he had trained his lower body for this moment. His organs inside were raging. His heart thought he was about to die, and the rest of him rejoiced that all their efforts were not in vain. The shield that had been protecting the young man all this time was also specially made for him by the blacksmith of his palace. The boy, smiling wryly, remembered that he had used a bursting cocktail especially for his brother. Having drunk this drink earlier, Raquel Adria decided to use it now by activating his slot. After doing so, his heart inside caught fire, and that energy started to come out. As a result, it mixed with the energy of Asrahan Theodore Palermo. Watching what was happening, all the spectators, including the emperor, were shocked. In just a couple of seconds, Theodore Palermo, who had just stood confidently on his feet, blushed and began to hiccup. The young man had become stupefied in an instant. Smiling in the face of his opponent, Raquel Adria remembered that in the Emperor of the Demon's Sword, it was written that the second prince became drunk even from a single glass of wine. It was for this that our hero had filled the slot last night with an explosive cocktail of 20 kinds of strong alcohol. Staggering around with his sword, Theodore Palermo realized that just now, when he hit the guy's shield, something through mana had entered him. His mind was completely stupefied. Somewhere in the recesses of his soul, the second prince was trying to bring himself to his senses and was saying to himself that he would have Raquel dead in less than 5 minutes. Theodore wished to be recognized by his father and congratulated by tens of thousands of people in the imperial capital. His dream was to be reborn as a proud crown prince, because the guy thought that it would be better for the imperial family and even for his brother whose health was deteriorating. And Raquel Adria at this moment was watching his opponent and didn't realize whether his tactics worked or not. But suddenly, after his thoughts, Teodoro Palermo took a fighting stance and said that he was going to win anyway. With a maximum oblique trajectory, the second prince moved towards his opponent. Raquel was surprised as his explosive cocktail the guy managed to withstand. And since the second prince was now more aggressive towards him, our hero decided that Theodore should drink some more. From his slot, the young man again redistributed the explosive cocktail to the second prince. He wanted the latter to drink it all down. At this moment, Theodore Palermo suddenly found himself in some bar. The guy didn't understand how it happened since he had recently been on the battlefield. In front of him stood a man with a shaker in his hands. After that, he handed the second prince a glass with a drink. Smiling, the man told the boy that this cocktail was from the gentleman sitting at the side. The young man turned around and saw a satisfied Raquel with a glass in his hands. After that, the second prince was suddenly on the battlefield again. All flushed, he was terrified that he was now also hallucinating. Then our hero threw out of his hands the shield, and gaining air into his lungs, sobered his opponent. Holding his breath, the young man rushed towards the second prince. He was about to throw out the substance that was stored in the circle slot, and finally approaching Theodore, he put his hand to his chest and mentally asked him to bear the pain. From this powerful energy wave, the second prince was thrown back. Out of his hands even lunged the sword he was trying so hard to hold. Seeing that Theodore Palermo was lying on the ground and not moving, the spectators were horrified. The emperor's mouth even opened in surprise. There was silence all around. All the eyes of the people were fixed on Raquel Adria Magentano. Looking at the young man, Asterion Testarossa was amazed that our hero really had the energy of Asrahan emanating from him. The man thought he was mistaken, but despite the fact that the energies of so many people were mixed in this place, and despite the fact that the emperor himself was far away, he felt the sharply pronounced resonance of the circle. After a while, Theodore Palermo woke up and saw our hero doing something with his foot. The boy was at a loss for words. But to dismiss unnecessary questions, Raquel Adria said that he was cleansing the mana of the second prince. Theodore asked the young man in amazement if this was Asrahan's method. He could not believe it. Then the second prince turned his head to the side. Watching our hero massaging his foot, Theodore realized he had lost. The guy couldn't believe it as much as his opponent. Then Theodore noticed blood on the guy's forehead. Wiping it off his forehead, Raquel Adria told the second prince that he probably hit the shield when he was blocking his attacks. At that moment, looking at the crown prince, Theodore realized that he was fighting hard. He wondered what his attitude was when Raquel Adria was fighting as hard as he could to squeeze all the juices out of his weak body. Theodore Palermo realized that he was acting as if victory was already on his side. Now, with a faded look, he sat back and realized that he had been too arrogant at that moment. After that, Raquel Adria rose to his feet and said that the mana purification was over for now. The guy then asked the second prince how the other prince was feeling. Clenching his hands into a fist and through his teeth, Theodore Palermo said that he was ashamed of himself. This made our hero uncomfortable as he didn't mean it at all and wanted to know how the guy felt physically. Theodore replied that he felt much better. With a proud look, Raquel Adria thought that it was because he had absorbed all the alcohol. After that, the second prince kneeled down in front of the young man and prepared to say something. This really surprised our hero. Theodore said in front of everyone that he lost the battle against Crown Prince Raquel Adria Magentano. Such a statement first dumbfounded all those present on the battlefield, and a second later from the stands were heard shouts of joy. Raquel was initially in the same state, but later he raised his hands in the air and shouted with delight that he had succeeded. Behind him, all this time, stood Piero Gardin. He was so happy for his crown prince that tears were streaming down his cheeks and he carefully wiped them away with a handkerchief. At this moment, a notification from the system appeared before our hero's eyes. It said that it was the first time the young man had successfully healed someone other than himself. And thanks to this, he had unlocked a new skill. Now the guy could increase his life expectancy by increasing the life expectancy of his patients. The system also added that for Theodore's treatment, our hero was able to increase his life expectancy by 1 day. It wasn't the best result, but it was okay. In any case, Raquel was not discouraged because if he could cure the patient, it would still be a plus for him. The young man was very happy about that. He realized that no matter how much he drank herbal concoctions or did acupuncture, it was as if he was pouring from empty to empty. And now it was over. Because our hero was absorbed in his thoughts, he did not notice how the emperor approached him. The man asked him why he didn't answer him. Asterion Testarossa looked tense. He asked Raquel if he had used Asrahan's technique. Slightly confused, the young man replied yes. After that, the man asked him how he managed to do it. But our hero could not answer this question as he did not understand it himself. Asterion frowned even more. Bowing his head, the young man didn't know how to tell him that he had managed to awaken the technique after his acupuncture treatments. In that case, the emperor folded his hands behind his back and told the boy that on his birthday, he had applied Asrahan's technique on his heart with his own hand. Raquel Adria appreciated this and said he was honored. The man then added that despite this, the guy could not manage the technique as he was too weak. Continuing to stand with his head bowed, our hero apologized to the man for that. And Asterion continued to speak and said that Raquel had managed to overcome the difficulty at a particularly important moment. In response, the boy again thanked his majesty, and the latter said that with this action the young man had broken his plans and spoiled his mood. For this, our hero again apologized to the man and finally understood the head. The guy did not understand to regard these words as an insult or a compliment. After that, the emperor turned around and said that in any case, promises are promises, and a duel is a duel. He added that the young man had defeated him today, and he would not deprive the boy of his title. But in spite of that, Asterion turned sharply towards our hero and said that he would continue to watch him anyway. All because the man still doubted the young man's ability to cope with the management of the empire. Then the emperor asked him a clarifying question, asking if he understood what he was saying. At that moment, Raquel clenched his fists in anger and remained silent. Asterion Testarossa didn't like it very much and asked why he didn't answer. Then our hero respectfully addressed the man and said that he had heard that he had recently neglected fencing training because he was concentrating on state affairs. The guy said that this should not be the case and that the emperor should move to maintain his physical strength and relax his tight muscles. All the while, Asterion frowned his eyebrows and listened to the young man. Raquel Adria also added that the man should eat more vegetables and stop smoking if possible. Asterion Testarossa asked with some disbelief and disdain if he was being told this by a man who was in a bad condition himself. But our hero did not take it as an insult and said that it was just his sincere advice. After a while, the man was riding in the carriage and thinking about what the guy had told him. He thought the man was trying to avoid his advice with such naive requests. Nervously twitching his foot, the emperor also thought that reckless use of Asrahan's technique with the lad's frail body could lead to serious consequences. Continuing to ponder about it, the man came to the conclusion that apparently Raquel was highly desperate when doing so. Our hero was a child who had lost his mother from infancy. On top of that, he was constantly sick. Asterion thought about the fact that he had placed too much hope in the boy and in return was endlessly disappointed in him. However, the small glimmer of hope that the boy had shown him today was beginning to stir his heart again. Meanwhile, Raquel Adria was also riding in his carriage and thinking about the fact that his father had also suffered a stroke. He remembered how they were just resting and he got a phone call. After that, the young man immediately rushed to the hospital. But it was too late. Our hero knew that Asterion had also had a stroke after his death at the beginning of the novel Emperor of the Demon Sword. The young man didn't want to let that happen and made sure the man stayed in good health. The lad decided that he would increase the man's life expectancy with his billing for cure skill. He didn't want to go through something like this again. At that moment, he was abruptly pulled out of his thoughts by Piero Gardin. The young man was startled again by the sharp voice of the healer. The man was covered in tears and asking our hero to ask him what those tears were. Smiling back, Raquel did as the man asked him, and Garden folded his arms and said they were tears of joy. The man asked how difficult it was for the young man, but the boy did not start talking and saying that he appreciated the gesture of the healer, added that he needed to rest. Raquel Adria said that from tomorrow he would have a lot of work. This surprised Piero Gardin, and the young man replied that he had to meet someone. After a while, the healer was in the company of some guy in one of the 10 most famous restaurants in the capital called Sorrentino Gardens. The man was a regular at this place, and looking at the guy sitting there, he asked, "Why all this disguise?" In front of him sat our hero. At that moment, a waiter came to take their order. Raquel Adria decided to have pasta without sauce and noodles and salad without vegetables. The young man also asked for wine not made from grapes and to be served before sunset. Listening to the crown prince's order, Piero Gardin was perplexed. And after the waiter said that they should follow him, the healer was speechless. Following the waiter, the healer whispered to the crown prince what the order was. But Raquel, keeping up the intrigue, said that the man would see everything now. Leading our hero and his assistant to some entrance, the waiter asked them to just go downstairs. Seeing this, Piero Gardin was even more surprised. He couldn't even think that there was such a place in this restaurant, and what amazed him even more was that the young man knew about it. Raquel Adria himself walked down the stairs and exhaled with ease, as it was just like in the novel. The healer was behind him, and he asked the young man what this place was and why they had come here. The lad replied by saying that he was here to collect medical bills. The man didn't understand what that meant and asked again. Our hero answered without explanation and said that he needed to find someone here. Then, going to the beautiful door, the young man asked the healer if he had ever heard of Damien. But Piero Gradin answered no, and then Raquel Adria opened the door in front of which they stood. Behind them was a view of a spacious field where men were fighting with swords. There were also spectators watching the action. Looking around, Piero Gardin asked the boy what this place was. In response, our hero said that it was secret. Then Raquel Adria started looking around for someone. He was looking for someone strong. The healer also helped him find the right person, but all the people the man pointed to were wrong. And after a few minutes, a golden gate opened in this place. Our hero smiled and said that finally, there was someone he needed. In the center of the battlefield walked a guy with a sword in his hands. It was the real protagonist of the novel named Damien Kane. On the field stood the referee, and next to him the man who had just fought. The contestant froze at the sight of Damien, and the referee even had to tell him to get out of here quickly. The presenter then began to introduce the main character of the novel as a man who has the devil's talent and is a fencing genius. The referee told that Damien made his debut in the gladiatorial arena at the age of 17. And in just 3 months, the young man defeated all the local fighters, becoming a champion. Today's opponent of the protagonist of the novel was someone terrifying. From a dark corner, red eyes became visible. A monster had entered the ring. Raquel Adria even covered himself with his hands when he saw it. A real troll was standing on the battlefield. At that moment, the young man's jacket was tugged by someone. It was the trembling Gardin. With a worried look, the man asked him what this place was and what they were here for. The healer didn't understand why it was necessary to throw people to the trolls. He watched in horror. Suddenly, the huge monster swung his equally huge fist at Damien, but he didn't even move. The troll's fist hit the ground a couple of centimeters from his feet. The adversary was very surprised that his victim was not frightened at all, so the troll decided to attack the boy again. And at the moment when the monster was running towards him, Damien pulled out his sword from its sheath and in an instant defeated the troll, splitting it in half. The spectators who were sitting in the stands at first watched with dumbfounded eyes. A couple of seconds later, the entire battlefield erupted in shouts of delight. Raquel Adria, standing on top of the crowd and watching, couldn't believe what had happened. He realized that Damien Kane was even scarier than he thought. After his victory, the young man turned towards the exit. Looking at him, our hero said that it was probably because of such strength that he was the main hero. Damien was compared to the great master Xavier Azrahan, who was said to be the strongest swordsman in history. While Piero Gardin stood like a pillar in complete shock, Raquel Adria asked him to keep his composure and follow him. After a while, they came to some doors where a formidable man was standing. As soon as he saw them, he turned to our hero in a menacing voice and asked who they were. But instead of answering, Raquel threw a gold bar in his hands, and the man immediately let them through. The young man then entered the guarded room and said hello to the man sitting there with a smile. At the table, wiping the blood from his face, sat Damien Kane. He said nothing in response to the boy and continued to watch him. With a confident step, the young man walked towards Damien. At this point in his thoughts, he was convincing himself that there was nothing to be afraid of. However, his large intestine laughed and thought the opposite. When Raquel came to the table, he grabbed a jar of pills on the table and asked the boy why he was taking such cheap painkillers. He asked if the boy could fall asleep after taking them. But Damien Kane looked at our hero with a kind of disdain and asked who he was. Smiling, the crown prince said that he was what he needed. Damien then asked if the young man had come to sell him medicine. Raquel said that the young man was almost guessing. Damien then waved his hands and told our hero to get lost. He wanted to add something else, but the boy interrupted him. The crown prince asked the fighter what was the point of having so many cheap medicines. At the same moment, he threw away the jar of pills that had been in his hands all this time. While Raquel stood with his back to him and continued talking, Damien Kane decided to take his weapon out of its sheath. And our hero said that with this kind of medicine, the guy would never be able to get rid of the pain in the back of his head. Demian was about to get up from his chair and attack the stranger. The prince noticed it from the side and thought that the show was about to start. Suddenly, an image from a projector appeared on the wall. Our hero asked the fighter to listen to a lecture on Korean traditional medicine. The young man told him that pain sensations usually start in the back of the head. As he approached Demian, he added that the back of his neck and the back of his head were stiff. Grabbing the guy by the shoulders, Raquel Adria asked him if the feeling didn't extend to the entire back of his head and shoulders. Then moving even closer to Demian, our hero asked if the guy was wondering how he knew all this. Clutching his head, the young man said that in severe cases the pain spreads to the temples, forehead, and eye sockets. And when this happens, he added that the person has goosebumps and cold sweat. There is also a feeling that the eyeballs are about to pop out from the pain. He went on to say that the funny thing is that the pain comes like a wave and then subsides over and over again. Raquel put his hand to his forehead and added that this pain drives people crazy. It could be called hell, because at first you think it's over and then the torture continues relentlessly. All this time, Demian listened to our hero with a nonchalant face. And the young man continued to say that usually people do not think about eliminating pain and just rely on cheap painkillers. While the crown prince was lecturing, Demian remained silent and noticed that the young man was talking too much. His ears were already bleeding, and he even thought that the talker should be destroyed. Raquel at that moment called the fighter a fool and asked him to finally answer something. After that, Demian wondered if he had given him a chance to say a word. Then he asked our hero who he really was to say such a thing. Smiling in response, Raquel Adria proudly stated that he was the crown prince. However, this did not sway Demian's opinion, and pulling out his sword, he decided to finish him off. Seeing this, our hero was frightened and, waving his hands, asked the fighter to stop. The young man said that it was all a joke, and in fact, he was from Mr. Koosman. These words managed to calm Demian down, and he asked if the man had really sent him, and Raquel said yes. Our hero repeated that he was sent to him by Demian's intermediary in the arena. The fighter fell silent again, and the crown prince said that Mr. Kussman had reported to him that he had complained that his medication had not been helping him lately. He added that the Lord was also having a hard time. Because of the change of seasons, there was a shortage of raw materials. But Demian still didn't understand what the young man was getting at, and Raquel said that he knew how to ease the boy's pain in other ways. The fighter thought that the young man just brought other medicines, but he answered no and said that the source of the pain had to be removed. While Demian was silent again, our hero clapped him on the back and asked him to take off his outer clothes and lie down. The prince added that he would explain everything to him during the treatment. After a short thought, the guy decided to agree and laid down on the bed with his torso exposed. Sitting down next to the fighter, Raquel asked him if he was scared. Demian Kane answered confidently and said no. Looking at the tattoo on the guy's back, our hero asked if it was really so. The fighter then stood up and said that he was a warrior. He added that he had fought in countless battles, suffering wounds and risking his life. Listening to the boy, the crown prince took out something cone-shaped at this moment and placed it on his back. Demian Kane was slightly shocked by this, but didn't interrupt the unusual treatment. Raquel Adria then asked the guy if he had ever tried the therapy of burning dried wormwood on certain points of the body. But the fighter reiterated that he was a warrior, which meant that he was trying Moxibustion's procedure for the first time. As our hero had a torch in his hands, he began to set fire to the wormwood on Demian's back. All this time, the guard and Piero Gardin were standing outside the door of the room. And as soon as a loud male scream was heard from there, they were very frightened. Demian, on whom the mugwort was burning, was writhing in unpleasant pain, and Raquel Adria was watching this and chuckled snidely. He was amused to see the swordsmanship genius crying from the treatment. Without taking his eyes off the guy, our hero realized that he was in pain, but he also realized that for the sake of results, he had to be patient. The reason why Demian couldn't leave the underworld was the branding on his back. When a branded person's blood circulation is activated, the curse embedded in the mark is triggered. Raquel said that if Demian participated in fierce battles in the arena, he would inevitably suffer severe pain. And in order to endure such incredible pain, Demian borrowed money for painkillers from Koosman. And to repay the debt, the protagonist of the novel fought in the gladiatorial arena. Folding his hands and frowning his eyebrows, Raquel Adria realized that the fighter is in some kind of vicious circle of drugs and battles. It made him hate Koosman more. Therefore, the young man wanted to help Demian. To do this, he decided to first use a strong heat to get rid of the seal. Our hero, with a smile on his face, realized that to cure the protagonist of the novel and the strongest man is equal to attract him to his side and even prolong his life. Raquel continued dreaming and said that it would be great if he could heal other gladiators. After a while, the young man told Demian that he was done and he could get up. On his back at that moment, there was a huge red stain from burnt wormwood. Examining his patient's back, the crown prince noticed that the stain had gotten a little paler. Raquel then asked the fighter how he was feeling. He also asked if the boy was in any pain. Touching his shoulder, Demian said with surprise in his voice that he felt pretty good. After that, a genuine smile appeared on his face. The guy said that he hadn't felt that way in a long time. Hearing this, our hero quite began to rub his nose. He took what the fighter said as praise. However, Demian is not fully healed yet. The young man said that the guy needed a few more cauterizations. Specifically, he meant that Demian needed a few more therapy sessions. Raquel said that if blisters appeared on the back of the area, they should not be touched. He also asked him not to overexert himself and not to eat fatty foods until the blisters went away. Demian had no questions about food, but he decided to ask about overexertion. Then our hero shouted indignantly and said that the guy shouldn't fight. Stammering and clenching his hands into a fist, the fighter said that Mr. Koosman would not allow him to do so. In response, Raquel Adria asked the guy not to worry and promised him to take care of it. After that, Demian looked at the young man as his guardian angel. He asked our hero what his name was and who he really was. With his nose back up again, Raquel said he had already told him who he was. Our hero repeated that he was the crown prince. But Demian didn't believe the young man and said that if he wasn't telling the truth, he had his reasons. In response, Raquel breathed heavily and said that in any case, the boy should now do exactly as he says. The crown prince added that no matter what happens tonight in the gladiatorial arena, Demian should stay here and not go anywhere. Like any human being, the guy had a lot of questions at this point and didn't understand what Raquel meant. Then, with an indignant shout, our hero practically ordered the fighter not to ask any questions. Turning to the door, the young man again asked Demian not to go out as it would be safer. And before leaving, Raquel told the boy that only then would he meet him again. In response, Demian Kane knelt down and bowed and let our hero know that he understood. Piero Gardin was waiting for his crown prince, and as soon as he came out, the man decided to address him. The healer asked the guy why he was looking for Demian and gave him such a strange treatment. The man also said that this place didn't seem safe or legal to him. Continuing to follow our hero, Gardin added that he had no idea what was going on today. Raquel replied that he would find out soon, but now he needed help. He asked the healers to find him a black-haired man with a ponytail. He added that he had a rather large build and narrow eyes. After a while, Piero Gardin came to a bar and started looking around for a man matching his crown prince's description. Raquel was also with him. At that moment, the healer's face changed to one of surprise, and he turned to the boy and said that he seemed to have found the man they were looking for. At one of the tables of the establishment sat a man with a mug of beer, who very much matched the description of our hero. Looking at him, the boy decided to see if he was the man he was looking for. With a smile, Raquel approached his table and started pushing back a chair to sit down. And it seemed that the man didn't quite like that impudence. The prince noticed that he had a very angry look in his eyes. He asked the stranger if his name was really Koosman. However, the man with furrowed eyebrows said that he did not know such a gentleman. In response, Raquel kept smiling and said that in that case, the man must still know Demian. The young man asked him to let him ask one question. Our hero said that he wanted to buy Demian Kane, and he also wanted to know the amount of the debt for the pain medication and for breaking the contract. From such a statement, the gentleman was at first puzzled, and then smiled broadly and said that the amount was 900 billion Majin and no less. Laughing, he added that only the crown prince would be able to afford such a sum. And at that moment, Raquel rather said that he was just that. The man laughed even more and said that if the guy was the crown prince, then so was he. Then the young man was surprised and said if it was a prince who was sitting in front of him selling medicines. After that, our hero decided to get up from the table. And the man got a little angry and told Raquel that if he is not going to buy anything from him, he should leave. And the young man did. Looking at him, the man thought about the first time he'd ever seen this guy in a place. Then he snapped his fingers and his subordinate approached him. The man wanted him to find out about our hero who he really was. He also gave his assistant permission to torture the guy if he needed to. And finally, the man said as usual to cut the young man into small pieces and throw him into the river. After an hour, Koosman had already drunk a lot of alcohol. Suddenly, the doors to the bar opened. The man didn't realize what was happening. His assistant, whose name was Derek, appeared in bloody clothes. He barely reached the table of the gentleman and immediately collapsed on the floor. Leaning over to him, Koosman asked his subordinate indignantly how he had managed to get into something so badly. But Derek was so weak that he answered the man nothing. Just as suddenly at that moment, our hero appeared in the doorway with his men. Raquel Adria pulled off his wig and took out his imperial badge. His men shouted that the secret imperial inspector had arrived. An hour before, the young man, along with Piero Gardin, had been walking down the street. Since the healer was tense, the boy asked him to behave naturally. In response, the man chuckled and rubbed the back of his head and said that he had never been followed. And our hero saw everything with his side vision. He felt that this is exactly what would happen. Whenever Koosman felt the slightest threat, he would immediately send his men to follow the one he feared. That's why Raquel Adria Magentano said he went to make personal contact with the man. But the young man still didn't understand how Cussman could be so predictable. Standing around the corner the whole time was Derek. Watching the guy and his assistant, he decided to pull out his knife. Suddenly, a man from the Imperial Guard appeared in front of him. Looking around, Derek noticed that our hero's men had surrounded him. The guy was accused of attempting to assassinate the Imperial family. Mr. Kussman was in complete shock when he saw Raquel. He didn't even know how to react to what was happening. Piero Gardin, standing behind the Crown Prince, asked him what the phrase "secret Imperial Inspector" meant. In response, the guy rubbed the back of his head and said that he just wanted to appear like that. Placing the Imperial badge on his guard's chest, the young man praised him for a job well done. Kussman still didn't understand what was going on. As soon as he noticed the Imperial Guard badge, he began to question even more. Then Raquel Adria turned to his men in a menacing tone and said that in the name of the Crown Prince he was ordering them to destroy this place. The young man also asked them to pay special attention to make sure that Kussman couldn't escape. The men of the Imperial Guard immediately rushed to carry out the order of their Crown Prince. At that moment, Piero Gardin stood there like a stumbling block, amazed that everything happened exactly as our hero had said. The man began to reflect on the fact that the young man recently as if replaced. Now the guy is dealing with underground organizations and taking care of the security of the Empire. And Raquel himself, watching what was going on, rejoiced that the Imperial Guard was handling everything so professionally. The guy realized that this would give him a lot of bonus lives. Since Kussman was hiding, the Crown Prince decided to find him. The man was hiding behind one of the pillars. He realized that if he was found, he'd be in trouble. So Kussman decided to run. He didn't understand how the young man could be the real Crown Prince. And most of all, he didn't understand why our hero needed Damien. So Kussman came to the conclusion that he should lay low until things settled down. The man decided to run into one of the rooms in the establishment, but as soon as he got there, he was met by men with swords. This made Kussman even more shocked. He didn't understand how the Imperial Guard ended up here. Along with them, he was met by our hero. Smiling, Raquel said that just as he thought, the man came running here. The boy and Piero Gardin even bet 500 Majan on it. Giving the young man the money, the healer got a little upset. Watching this picture, Kussman was completely bewildered by what was happening. Seeing the man's stupid expression, our hero asked if he really did not understand anything. Gloating, the guy realized that no matter how much he thought, it was difficult to find answers to his questions. Then Raquel Adria said with a smile on his face that he thought it was important to pay for the medicine. Then his smile disappeared and he added that he hates it when people don't pay their bills. The boy said that he didn't like to be treated like that and he himself didn't like to do that to others. Silently listening to the Crown Prince, Kussman still didn't understand anything and thought that the guy was talking nonsense. Then Raquel explained that that was why he had asked the man about the cost of Demian's painkillers and how much he owed him. Kussman remained silent. Summarizing, the young man said that he offered him a deal, but the man safely refused. Listening to the monologue of the Crown Prince, Kussman began to get angry and his hands gathered into fists. And taking out blades from his pockets, the man threw at our hero with questions about what he was carrying. However, Kussman's attack was not successful. He was met by the steel fist of a man from the Guardian Empire. Not expecting this, the man hit his nose against the fist and flew backwards. The other guards pointed their swords at him and asked him to stay still. Realizing that the situation was not on his side, Kussman decided to act. He took out a pill from under his tooth and jammed it in his jaw. Now everyone had 5 seconds. Biting into the pill would start the countdown to the explosion. This would create a poisonous explosion that would cause a huge commotion. And when exposed to the poison, the person would be immediately paralyzed. Kussman realized that if he was unlucky, he could get into serious trouble. So after spitting out the capsule, he decided to just roll on the floor and create some distance. But what to do next, the man hadn't thought of yet. However, after a couple seconds, the thought of separating the Crown Prince's head from his body popped into his head. Kussman thought that this was a great plan. That's why he started counting down 5 seconds. And just as he reached 2, a hand appeared from behind his back, covering his mouth. It was Raquel Adria. With a smile on his face, he turned to the man and asked what he was going to spit out. Kussman was at a loss and didn't understand how the guy knew about his secret weapon. And as time ran out, the capsule began to take effect. The man fell on all fours as his body became paralyzed. He tried to force himself to pull himself together as he knew that in 3 minutes he might pass out. With trembling hands, he reached into his inside pocket to drink the antidote. But Raquel's hand was ahead of him and pulled out a bottle of green liquid. Seeing the surprised look on Kussman's face, he assumed he was wondering how he knew all this. Having opened the bottle with its contents, our hero, with accents on each syllable, declared that he would not tell him anything about it. With fear in his eyes, Kussman held out his hands to our hero with some hope. But it was pointless. Raquel Adria Magentano threw back his head and poured the antidote into his mouth. With a hint of rubbing the excess from his face, the Crown Prince asked Kusman if this liquid was really useful. Continuing to shiver, the man did not take his gaze away from the bottle. In his thoughts, he asked the young man to give him the antidote. But Raquel was not going to do that and threw the bottle behind his back. The boy said that since he had poisoned Kusman, he would cure him. To do this, our hero decided to use the skill of billing for treatment. At this moment, foam was already coming out of the man's mouth. He realized he couldn't hold on any longer, and in a second, Kusman fell to the floor. The guy was glad he did, as this position of the man was comfortable for him. Having counted the right place, which was below the spinous process of the fifth thoracic vertebra, 1.5 inches on both sides of the spine, the young man pressed on the point of the heart. After that, liquid spurted out of Kusman's mouth, and he woke up abruptly from this effect on his body. Now it was time for the antidote to take effect. Raquel began to release the antidote that was stored in the circle slot. Placing his hands on Kusman's body, the Crown Prince began to instill the antidote into him. At first, the man tensed up again with his eyes bulging, and then unconsciously collapsed again. The system notified the young man that Kusman's life had been increased by 21 years and 2 months, and the life of Raquel Adria increased by 118 days. Such news pleased the boy. After finishing the treatment, the young man asked the Imperial Guard to take Kusman away. He was going to deal with what he needed and then return back to the palace. Meanwhile, Damian Kane was fighting in some corridor with gladiators, and he was very surprised that they were so strong. At that moment, our hero approached him. Seeing the fighter, he clucked as he disobeyed him and didn't wait in his room. Seeing him, Damian was confused as the Crown Prince was really standing in front of him. Raquel Adria approached him and with a smile on his face asked him if he believed that he was really the Crown Prince. Damian replied nothing to our hero as a memory from his past popped up in his mind. The memory was from his childhood. Little Damian was standing over the body of his mother. This is what she looked like in the last moments of her life. And the boy has a recurring dream about the day he was all alone in the world. No, he didn't. He thought he was abandoned. At that moment, a voice came from outside asking Damian to wake up. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Raquel and Piero Gardien were standing in front of him while he was lying on the bed. The doctor smilingly extended his hand to Damian and introduced himself as His Highness personal physician. Staying in some space, the boy also extended his hand to the man and introduced himself. Then their acquaintance was interrupted by our hero and asked Damian to hurry up as they had a lot of things to do today. Leaving the guy in the room, the healer asked Raquel what the guy planned to do this time. The young man didn't like this question and asked if the man didn't trust him. But this question remained unanswered. After a while, they brought Damian Kane to the Moxibustion clinic. Looking around, the guy did not understand where he was and asked our hero about it. Raquel told him that it was the treatment room. With Damian in the room were other people who were involved in the battles. One of the men was surprised that not only were they taken out of the dungeon, but they would be treated in the palace. They didn't understand why the Crown Prince had been so kind to them, and Raquel himself realized it was strange, but he wasn't doing it out of the goodness of his heart. Examining the gladiators, our hero assumed they were between 20 and 30 years old. This meant that if he broke the curse of the stigma, he would get a lot of bonus lives. However, the young man thought it was stupid to tell the guys the truth. So Raquel said in a serious voice that nothing is free, and asked if the gladiators thought he was doing it out of mercy. The Crown Prince shared with the gladiators that he was very sick. More accurately, he said that he had many illnesses. One of the lads responded with some delight, saying that everyone in the Empire knew about it. And such shouting from a gladiator, the young man thought it was not very nice. So Raquel decided that his treatment would be the most painful. Then our hero added that none of the doctors could not cure him, and every time he was getting worse. That is why the young man said that he decided to look for a cure on his own. After that, Raquel Adria turned to Damian and asked him if he guessed what he was talking about. And the boy said that he thought that the Crown Prince had brought them here to try out his new treatments. And it was true. When the rest of the gladiators heard this, they looked around nervously, and Raquel asked Damian what he thought of his treatment. Then the fighter said that after the first session, his pain was gone. There was silence in the treatment room, but some of the gladiators thought that if Damian said so, they should trust the prince. Watching his subjects, our hero asked if there was anyone in the room who was nervous about the upcoming treatment, but everyone was silent. Raquel Adria smiled as he realized that this was his success. Now he could safely prescribe them the treatment of their choice. Without wasting any time, the young man asked all the gladiators to take off their shirts and lie down on the bed. The smell of wormwood and the wild screams of the men wafted out of the treatment room. 6 days later, the atmosphere in the room was not very cheerful. Raquel Adria noticed that the gladiators were sweating and vomiting. Biting his fingers, the prince assumed that these were symptoms after the withdrawal of painkillers. He realized that it would be difficult to continue the moxibustion treatment. At that moment, his attention was drawn to Damian Kane sitting on the bed. Approaching him, our hero decided to ask him a few questions. The young man asked if the guy was dizzy and nauseous. He replied that these symptoms were present, but he tried to restrain himself. This answer dumbfounded Raquel. He could not believe that it was even possible. The young man assumed that it was an advantage of the protagonist. Now, the Crown Prince realized that he had no choice but to use something else. Our hero told the gladiators that the treatment was over for the day and they should drink plenty of water and rest in their rooms. And the guy who was scarred and trembling, he asked to stay. The gladiator's name was Sergio. Raquel approached him and asked him if he was suffering from symptoms after refusing painkillers. However, he denied it, although you couldn't tell from his appearance. In that case, the Crown Prince told Sergio he would help him. The young man pulled out a needle from his belongings. But in fact, our hero himself was not sure if acupuncture would help the gladiator. Since Sergio had been on painkillers longer than any other gladiator, the symptoms were more severe. That's why the guy was the perfect candidate for testing. Raquel Adria decided to start with the stomach meridian, and so the first acupuncture point was on the second toe. Remembering what to do next, the Crown Prince was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice Sergio's strange behavior. Abruptly becoming stronger, the gladiator attacked our hero from the back and began to strangle him. Raquel Adria was so shocked that he could not do anything and mentally called for help. After a while, the young man began to turn red from suffocation. Suddenly, Sergio's eyes rolled back. The gladiator collapsed next to the Crown Prince and Demian Kane stood beside him. With a nonchalant face, he asked Raquel if he was all right. Holding out his hand to the fighter and coming to his senses, Raquel said he was fine. Looking at Sergio, the young man assumed that his reaction was due to his syndromes, and all this happened despite the slight stimulation. Our hero noticed that now the gladiator's nervous system was very sensitive, so even a minor irritation felt like a knife thrust. And to correct this, Raquel Adria needed a much finer needle. In the evening, the young man was in his study reading a letter from his blacksmith. By the Crown Prince's orders, he could forge a needle as thin as thread. But the man was not sure he could forge several needles of the same thickness. Only a dwarf could do that. So in the letter, the blacksmith apologized. Sighing unhappily, Raquel realized that things were only getting worse as he had no time. Grabbing his head, our hero brainstormed to think of what he should do now. The system notified him that the guy's internal organs were feeling stress, which was the cause of many diseases, and they were sending him a signal about it. Lungs and large intestines surrounded the heart and asked our hero if he wanted a clue with an evil smile, and the guy didn't realize what was going on. While the intestines were massaging Heart's legs, the system asked Raquel if he remembered how to use his life points, and the boy realized it was about the draft. The points earned could be spent on unlocking skills and summoning different creatures. The boy chose the second option, and pressing the right button, our hero prayed that it was something good. Before starting, the system asked the young man to think of what abilities he would like to give the creature. Without hesitation, Raquel Adria said that he wanted the creature to be able to deliver a large number of fine needles. The system indicated that the request had been accepted, and several gift boxes floating in the air appeared in front of the young man. In each of them was the name of a creature. Of the three names, one was a jackpot, the second was average, and the third was a complete mess. And while Raquel Adria was pondering which of the names to choose, it was already dawning. At that moment, the guy's heart was raging and screaming that he was about to die of disappointment. His heart ordered him to take a creature called the defecating cactus. Our hero didn't even bother to argue with his organ and did exactly as he said. Watching the gift box glow, Raquel Adria prayed that the creature was the jackpot. After a second, a small hedgehog fell out of there. Taking it in his hands, the guy noticed how tiny and cute it was. The system gave out a tutorial on how to use Tiny. It said that the hedgehog could be resized by feeding it the sunflower seeds that came with it. In the hedgehog's little paws was a red pouch. Looking at the bag, our hero didn't understand where it came from. The system said that red sunflower seeds make Kroha huge size, and the maximum duration of magnification was equal to 12 hours. Blue sunflower seeds make Tiny shrink in size. The system said that they could be fed to the hedgehog before he exceeded the time limit for gigantism. The hedgehog's skills were infinite spikes. If you pulled one out, a new one would sprout. Also, one of the skills of the beast was that he could turn into a spiky ball and attack. And lastly, Tiny could shoot white, brown, and black spikes. Each color has a different stimulus intensity. In general, as befits a hedgehog, his attack skills were specialized in the use of needles. The young man then leaned over to the kid and asked if he could borrow some needles. He answered Raquel in his own language and seemed to be fine with the request. Understanding this, our hero asked the hedgehog for one needle of each color. The guy looked at the white needle stuck in his body and realized that it should tingle slightly. For gladiators, that was enough. Having done the same with the brown needle, the boy felt that it stung very well. The black one looked very ominous to him. Raquel decided to try it on someone else later. Anyway, the Crown Prince happily announced that the problem with the needles was solved. Sometime later, Piero Gardin came to our hero at the Moxie Busto Therapy Clinic. Seeing a small hedgehog on the young man's shoulder, the man was speechless, and Raquel, as if nothing had happened, decided to introduce them. As the crown prince realized that his assistant would now have a lot of questions, he again decided to make up a story about how he got this animal. Then Raquel Adria abruptly turned back and told Piero Gardin that he could ask Tiny for details. Looking after the departing guy, the healer was surprised to think that his beast was a summoned creature. Like the rattlesnake, hamster, and other such creatures that were rumored to have helped the genius builder Lloyd Frontera 300 years ago. They appear in the world very rarely and serve their chosen people for the rest of their lives. Gardin didn't understand how the young man had gotten such a beast. As he continued to stare at Raquel Adria's back, the man wondered what he didn't know about him. After a while, Sergio came to his senses in the treatment room. Regretting his act, he apologized to the crown prince and said that he had committed a crime worthy of death. However, the boy asked him not to worry and said that such things happen when you are in excruciating pain. He also added that it would not hurt now. Sergio was very surprised and said that he had to try it first, but the guy smiled and said that he had already done it. The gladiator's whole arm was in needles. At this rate, Raquel Adria was running from one fighter to another and pricking their bodies with needles. The crown prince realized that if this continued, it would be wonderful. And at this moment, the system gave a notification that the healing account skill had been activated. His life expectancy, if everything went according to plan, was going to be 71 days. Also, the level of the skill had increased. This made Raquel jump happily on the spot. At this moment, Demian Kane was standing behind the young man. He didn't understand why the prince was so excited about their recovery. And Raquel Adria kept looking at the notification from the system and smiled. The problems with the gladiators were solved. Meanwhile, Asterion Testarossa was sitting in his palace drinking tea. He was approached by his subordinate, who brought the man a regular report on the actions of His Highness the Crown Prince. He told him that 2 days ago, all 14 gladiators had been appointed as his bodyguards. This surprised the emperor very much. And the subordinate added that all gladiators were given the title of Special Guard and ordered to be always near our hero. Then Asterion asked what the young man offered them in return, to which the informer replied that the lad had offered them a contract with a guaranteed salary and various benefits. This stunned the man even more. He could not believe that the sick boy had gathered his own army of gladiators, but it made the emperor more interesting. Then the subordinate added that the prince gathered all the servant maids and guards of the palace and began to mercilessly stab them with needles. From what he heard, the smile on Asterion Testarossa's face disappeared. The calm expression on his face was replaced by bewilderment. Meanwhile, Raquel Adria Magentano continued to experiment with the acupuncture treatment. He was pricking a man, and the man began to yelp. The guy asked him if it hurt. The subject was his servant, and he said no. In that case, the boy didn't understand why the man was whining. And as it was reported to the emperor, our hero, after one subordinate, went to another. A few days ago, Raquel was standing in the courtyard. Turning around, he noticed someone and asked how he was feeling lately after the treatment. Behind him stood Damian Kane. In a calm voice, he said he was still feeling the burning sensation. In response, the young man said that he wished he didn't have to undergo moxibustion therapy anymore. The crown prince then explained that the boy was completely healthy and his treatment was over. Demian was surprised again. In response, Raquel Adria said that the effectiveness of the treatment had been proven, and that was the end of the experiment. At first, the gladiator did not know what to answer, but after he bowed and began to thank our hero, but the young man, waving his hands, asked him to wait with this. Raquel first asked the guy to listen to him. He said that he liked the way Demian handled the sword and he didn't want to say goodbye to him. Our hero didn't want the fighter to waste his talent, and he had a proposition for him. Extending his hand to Demian Kane, Raquel Adri Magentano offered him to become his personal knight. Of course, the young man didn't ask him to stay for gratitude or anything like that. He said that a generous monthly salary, vacation pay, and even a pension would be waiting for him. In fact, the young man realized that Damian would become an expert swordsman and would suffer from swordmaster syndrome. And that was something the boy himself knew about. Master Sword Syndrome is a stage when all the senses of a person are hypersensitive and it is impossible to control them. In this case, Demian's insomnia would be worse than before he was branded. Raquel Adria could try to keep the guy under the pretext of treatment, but most likely he would leave. And in this situation, the best solution was to help each other out. Our hero told the guy that he would write an employment contract and provide parental and maternity leave. Since Demian did not answer anything, the young man added that he would give him freedom of movement and help with housing. The boy again did not answer anything, and in response our hero laughed and joked that he had experience in negotiations. At this point, red eyes were visible from the bushes. Also, Raquel Adria complimented that the guy was expecting a 4-day work week, and then behind Demian appeared the rest of the gladiators who asked to take their position too. The crown prince was surprised by their appearance. and the gladiators asked the young man to let them repay his help to them. They said they would protect Raquel when Damien wasn't around, and our hero realized it was for the generous compensation and benefits, not the treatment. The boys didn't mince words and confirmed it. Rolling his eyes, the young man thought they were being too honest. Raquel Adria decided it was better that way. Moreover, the prince decided that it would be good to create his own squad that would obey only him. Because the royal guard didn't really belong to Raquel, and in case of a conflict between the emperors and his orders, the emperor would be given priority. And after his reflections, our hero happily announced that all the gladiators were hired into his guard. Also, Raquel Adria Magentano gave their group the name Special Guard. All the guys started cheering at this news. It even pleased Damien Kane, who usually kept his emotions in check. Even though the Crown Prince had cured all of them, the number of bonus days they received was not that great. He realized that if he extended their lives even for 100 years, he would only get 18 days. With the young man's weak stamina and poor physical condition, our hero couldn't go in search of patience by himself. Suddenly, his gaze was drawn to his own palace. At that moment, an idea occurred to Raquel Adria. It was evening. Sitting in his office, our hero decided to set up a hospital in the palace. Next to him stood Piero Gardin and Damien Kane. The boy didn't understand what the prince's words meant and asked again. While they were communicating, the healer stood back and trembled. After that, he suddenly twitched and turned to the highness with tears in his eyes. Such a sudden movement startled Raquel again. Then Piero Gardin, still crying, said that he finally understood what the prince wanted. He said that he wanted to open a hospital to take care of people and give them mercy. The man thought that this reflected His Majesty's beautiful and noble heart. Raquel Adria supported this thought and asked with joy if the healer finally understood what he was talking about. With sparks in his eyes, Piero Gardin said that the young man put the suffering of his people above his own illnesses. The two of them stood in strange poses and waved their hands, shouting that it was all for the people. And behind them stood Damien Kane, and this time he held back his emotions. After that, our hero suggested that the guys take up the treatment of their employees. The prince asked the man to imagine that they would open a hospital in the palace and start receiving people. And then he asked the healer if the patients would feel comfortable coming to see them. Then Gardin thought about it and replied that after all, this was the palace of His Highness the Crown Prince, and it would be quite burdensome to visit. That was why they needed publicity. The young man suggested using something like stories of successful treatments that people might be interested in. Raquel said that once word spread, the number of people coming to them for treatment would increase. After a while, our hero was distraught. In a few days, he had treated only 500 people. He didn't understand why everyone around him was so healthy. Wandering from side to side around the room, the young man realized that by curing 500 people, he would only get 2 bonus days of life. Raquel decided he needed a very sick patient. Suddenly, an interesting thought came into his head again. In front of our hero lay a pile of papers that contained information about all 500 people and that Gardin had brought him. Wiping the sweat from his face, the man said that at the young man's request, they had collected a list of relatives with their names, gender, age, and diseases. Looking at the paper, Raquel wondered what to do if the palace staff was too healthy. After a second, his answer was that a survey should be conducted to assess the condition of their family members. Flipping through the information, the guy was sure he would find at least one seriously ill person. It had been quite some time since he had started his search for the perfect patient, but in the end, he didn't find the right one. As Raquel Adria continued to look through the information, he couldn't believe that the patients were all healthy, even in the family. But he was still hopeful as 10 pages remained. At this point, Damien Kane said that he was disappointed. This surprised the Crown Prince. With all due respect, the boy decided to ask the young man a question. Damien asked if it was possible that he considered patients as tools. Such a question embarrassed our hero. Then the fighter explained that the prince needed good stories to attract more patients. However, the way Raquel Adria was behaving now made Damien think that he was looking for a man who was about to die. Piero Gardin decided to step in for the prince. It seemed to him that the boy was beginning to be rude to His Highness. The man said he was sure that the young man had thought of everything. Then our hero began to laugh nervously and shiver. He thanked the healer for the warm words, but there was one thing. Raquel said that in fact the boy's thought was not entirely wrong. Hearing this, Piero Gardin began to rub his neck nervously and apologized to the prince. Then Damien Kane suddenly took the man's side. He said that our hero was too harsh and asked him to apologize to his loyal subordinate who wanted to protect him. And after Piero Gardin again reproached the guy that his speech towards the Crown Prince was disrespectful. It was a kind of vicious circle. Watching his men, Raquel Adria didn't understand what was going on. So without a second thought, he threw them out of the office. And left in silence alone with his thoughts, the young man looked at the last 10 pages of information. As soon as he picked up the first page, his expression changed dramatically. He began to read what was written. The whole story was in the name of a girl who had a younger brother of 8 years old. She said that once or twice a month he foams from his mouth and shakes, as if possessed by a demon. The girl said that she went to different doctors, but no one could determine the cause. The priest said that the only thing she could do was pray to drive the evil demons out of his body. After reading this story, Raquel Adria Magentano was overjoyed. He had finally found what he needed. After a while, the girl and her younger brother named Georges were in the Crown Prince's office. Our hero approached the boy and said hello. Georges was very shy as he was too small, and the prince himself was sitting in front of him. And to lighten the mood, the young man told the boy that he could just call him brother. Raquel understood how hard it was for Georges in this situation. He also knew of a miracle remedy that could relieve the tension of the young patients. He took something out of his pocket and handed it to the boy covered with a handkerchief. As soon as the handkerchief was removed, the candy was revealed underneath. When Georges saw the candy, as children do, he was happy to receive it. Raquel Adria then told the boy that he could have it. However, Georges was still tense and hesitated to do so. The young man noticed something wrong and asked him what was wrong. Bowing his head, Georges said in a sad voice that the boy could not touch him. Of course, this raised more questions from our hero. Then the boy explained that he was cursed by an evil spirit. Georges said that this is why the other children always laugh at him and say that he is strange. And to support the boy, Raquel Adria said that it was not true at all. Clenching his little fists, Georges said that yesterday he got into a fight because the other children were laughing and shouting in his face, but unfortunately he lost and his eyes got dark. Georges said sometimes he suddenly feels strange. His body feels cold, shivering, and tingling. At such times he feels as if he is floating in the air and then falling to the ground. He also feels like the sky is moving away and he hears strange sounds. And afterwards, Georges says he is coming to his senses and feels completely weakened. Raquel Adria was a little loaded from such a story and then asked if the boy had really been enduring such a condition all this time. Without waiting for Georges to answer, our hero hugged him and told him that he was very brave. From such support, the boy cried and told the prince that he should not touch him because he was possessed by an evil spirit. But our hero replied that it was not an evil spirit. The young man was sure of this as he began to read the boy's pulse. Georges was generally healthy, but he showed signs of epilepsy. This was caused by irregular brainwaves and could lead to severe generalized tonic-clonic seizures. Looking at the boy, Raquel realized that epilepsy was commonly referred to as seizures. Normally it wasn't so scary, but the unexplained surge of brainwaves made it more complicated. The young man then rose from his knees and told Georges that the boy was in no way possessed or strange. Georges was surprised and asked with hope in his voice if that was really the case. The boy smiled and said yes. After all, his little brother was the crown prince and he was never wrong. Raquel was glad he had discovered the epilepsy now. However, he still didn't understand the cause of its occurrence. And that was driving the young man crazy. He didn't even have the right equipment. At that moment, our hero was called by Georges. Looking at the boy, the guy was surprised. Georges was grabbing his chest and squirming. He said he didn't feel well. Watching what was going on, everyone around him got scared. Our hero realized it was a seizure but didn't know why it started happening. Piero Gardin grabbed his head and said that the boy was actually possessed. Demian, pointing the knight towards Georges, asked Raquel to move away from him. The reaction of his subordinates infuriated the young man. He ordered them to stop talking about the evil spirit and told them that the boy was just sick. The boy believed that patients should be cared for and protected. The crown prince added that Georges was now suffering unbearably and asked one of his assistants to bring him a pillow. The healer stammered and said he would certainly do so. In a few minutes, the boy was lying on the pillow, and everyone in the room sat around him. Piero Gardin noticed that Georges was foaming at the mouth and asked our hero if he should wipe it off with a handkerchief. But Raquel asked the man never to do that. He said that the boy's jaw muscles contract uncontrollably, and so if Gardin made a mistake, he could swallow or bite off his handkerchief. The young man said that there was nothing they could do now but take care of him until the attack passed. The subordinates did not argue with the crown prince's words. Suddenly, looking at Georges, Raquel Adria began to look worried. The boy was glowing all over and the guy didn't understand why he was sensing his mana. That's when he remembered about Asrahan's technique. The technique could easily pick up the flow of mana. Mana is the circulation of energy, and the young man thought that if he could see it accurately, he might be able to determine the cause of his epilepsy. Then our hero put his hand on the boy's chest and saw what he needed to see. The prince noticed that Georges' mana flow was erratic, and the young boy realized how big a disaster this was. The flow was simply uncontrollable. Raquel Adria decided that he should focus and touch the boy's energy. He felt he had to find the source of his epilepsy. Wandering through the streams, our hero passed the spinal nerve to the cranial nerve and so on. At this rate, the young man noticed he was already tired, but the source of his epilepsy was still nowhere to be seen. The guy's heart began to pound hard, but that didn't stop him. As Raquel continued his search, he came across something strange. He saw a wandering nerve in the boy's energy flow, and that was what our hero was looking for. Shocked by this, the young man realized that the erroneous signals from the vagus nerve had caused a nerve malfunction in his brain and consequently in his entire body. The crown prince then turned to his subordinates and asked them to bring a blanket and cover the child. He said that Georges should rest and should not be disturbed. At this moment, sweat was dripping off our hero, and he complimented them not to make too much noise or fuss. And as soon as Raquel Adria finished his thought, his eyes began to blur and he lost consciousness. The subordinates were frightened for their crown prince and tried to bring him back to consciousness. The young man smiled and thought that now knowing the cause of the boy's seizures, he would be able to cure him. It was late at night. The boy came to himself. He was very dizzy. He assumed that he had blacked out because he had unknowingly activated Asrahan's technique to the limit. Next to Raquel's bed stood Damien Kane. The young man had not expected his presence and was therefore slightly frightened. The gladiator said that the prince slept half a day. Then our hero asked how the child felt. Damien answered that he woke up in the evening but looked very tired. This did not surprise the young man, as Georges had suffered a severe seizure. Then Damien said that they fed the boy and put him back to sleep. Raquel tried to get up and marveled at how Asrahan's method had helped him. He even thought it was better than the MRI. Now that the crown prince knew that the cause of the seizure was the vagus nerve, there was only one way to treat it. It was nerve stimulation. While our hero was thinking of his next steps, Damien looked at him with surprised eyes. The gladiator asked the young man where he was going so late at night, putting on his outerwear Raquel Adria with a smile on his face, about to be struck by lightning. After a while, the crown prince and Damien Kane were already approaching some guarded place. At first, the men were wary of the unfamiliar silhouettes in the distance, but as soon as our hero approached them, their mood changed to one of surprise. Raquel Adria approached the guards and thanked them for their hard work and asked them to take him to Mr. Janitas' room. A couple minutes later, they were standing at the beautiful doors. Once inside, they found a man preparing to sleep. It was the court sorcerer Janitas, and seeing our hero, he was very dumbfounded. The young man apologized to him for such a late visit and said that he wanted to ask the man for a favor. Smiling sweetly, Raquel Adria asked the warlock to put a lightning bolt in his back. Hearing this, the man was even more shocked and didn't even understand what his boyfriend was asking for at first. The day before, Janatus had visited the emperor, who told him that the crown prince had been doing a lot of strange things lately. Asterion Testarossa was concerned that the lad might do more crazy things, and the man realized that everyone gets so desperate when they have children. He had served his majesty all his life and wondered if he didn't know his intentions. At this point, our hero was shaking the warlock and practically begging him to strike him with lightning. This made Janatus even more convinced that the young man had definitely changed. And then the man looked menacingly at Raquel Adria and asked him if he had gone completely insane. He asked why he would try to harm the crown prince. The sorcerer realized that he could not live from it, but our hero explained that he only needed a small electrical impulse that would not cause harm and would be stable for 3 hours. Lightning magic is actually a very destructive attack. Lightning spells cast by high-level wizards equate to minor disasters, and the guy wanted it reduced to the power of electricity and sustained for 3 hours. All of this required very precise mana control. After much deliberation, the wizard turned to the prince and asked if he realized that this was an incredibly difficult task. And of course, Raquel Adria understood completely. He said that this task was like driving a car for 3 hours at a speed of 30 kilometers. That was why the guy had come to the magician. After all, he was the only one who could control the mana so carefully. Then Raquel Adria continued to suck up to the man and asked who was the best magician in the entire empire. This question made the warlock embarrassed, as the answer implied him. While Janatus himself remained silent, all of our hero's organs cheered and pronounced the man's name. The crown prince and the warlock negotiated away from everyone. All the while, Damien and the rest of the guards were watching them. Judging by their emotions, they understood nothing. Weighing the pros and cons, Janatus was almost ready to agree, but there was something that stopped him. He asked Raquel what would happen if something happened to him. The young man asked the man not to worry. The boy also added that he would relieve him of responsibility if anything happened to him. He said that the guards and Damien would be witnesses. Our hero said that he is not trying to do anything wrong and just wants to save someone's life. In that case, Janatus agreed and asked when they could start. Without hesitation, Raquel said that they would start immediately. A few minutes later, the wizard was already standing with his staff, and the young man was thinking about the fact that you can't just use electricity on a child. He realized that everything had to be tested first. At that moment, the man turned to our hero and asked if he was ready. But Raquel Adria didn't answer. He had fallen into a state of trance and radiated energy from himself. In that case, Janatus decided that it was time to start. Stretching out his hand towards the boy, he too began to radiate energy from himself. The man directed a stream of electricity towards the crown prince. At this moment, Raquel felt his back tingling, and the guy remained calm. He was glad that the court mage was doing well. After that, the guy decided that now it was his turn. Raquel decided to absorb the current and process it into electrodes, capturing the electrical signals. Our hero noticed that the opposite signal, completely symmetrical to the erroneous one generated by the child's vagus nerve, would control that nerve for the rest of his life. With a satisfied face, Raquel Adria thought of Azrahan's method again. This skill seemed very tricky to him, and he didn't even suspect that it would work out on the first try. Then the boy turned to face Janitas and asked him in a low voice to stop. In response, the man said he could keep doing it all day long. But the crown prince was persistent and shouted at the entire castle for the wizard to stop because he was already burning. After a while, a crowd of people gathered around one of the palace rooms. Many did not understand why the young man had summoned so many people and wondered about it. Some of the crowd thought that the guy wanted to gather those who liked to spread rumors. But in any case, no one understood what he had in mind. Among all these people was Georges' sister. They all gathered in the crown prince's room. The boy was sitting in front of his bed on which the boy was seated. The young man turned to him and told him that he would not ask him not to be nervous, as the medicine could be bitter and the healing procedures slightly painful. In his hands was a needle. The boy looked at the point and asked Raquel if it would sting a lot, to which the boy replied that it would be like a mosquito bite and it wouldn't hurt at all. Georges didn't quite trust the prince as he was very afraid, but while the boy was asking the young man questions, he had already stuck the needle into his neck. The child didn't even feel a thing. Then our hero stood up and turned to Janitas. Now he realized that the boy would not be completely pleasant. Then the man, with the help of his staff, directed an electric stream towards the prince. Thus, the electricity was slowly building up in Raquel Adrian's heart. While all this was happening, the guy wanted everyone present in the room at that moment to watch and spread the news about this new ingenious treatment. This was what was called viral marketing. Raquel then removed the needle from the boy's neck and decided to connect their back current. Wandering through Georges' currents again, the boy came to the vagus nerve, but fear suddenly appeared on his face. He realized that something was wrong. After a second, the boy realized what was wrong. The boy's mana flow became unstable and our hero ran before he exploded. Soon, Georges was about to have a seizure. At this point, the child himself turned to the crown prince and asked if they would be sitting like this for much longer. And the kid continued to run through the mana streams. He had at most 3 minutes left before the seizure started, and at worst 1 minute. A couple minutes later, Raquel Adria reached the right electrode to apply the opposite signal. Things were not going well for our hero, to put it mildly. The guy realized that even if he used Azrahan's technique at full power, it would take half an hour, and the young man did not want to stop as there could be strange rumors. Moreover, there might not be a second chance. The prince was even a little panic-stricken at not knowing what to do. Then he turned to Janitas. Raquel Adria asked the man to increase the power of lightning magic by another 3 times. The warlock did not expect to hear such a request, but the crown prince insisted and said he would explain everything later. Doubting the correctness of the young man's decision, Janitas said that it would be very painful. However, even this did not stop our hero. Then the man agreed to fulfill his majesty's request and directed a stream of electricity towards the guy. From such a blow, Raquel's jaw clenched tightly. There were 10 seconds left before the seizure began, and to complete the treatment, more mana had to be absorbed and recycled. Our hero pondered where he would place the electrode. After a couple of seconds, Raquel Adria came to the conclusion that it should be placed on the carotid artery. With 5 seconds to go before the seizure started, the guy deftly wrapped the carotid artery. At this point, Georges was already very sick. Watching what was happening, everyone present was frightened. Bleeding with sweat, the boy did not stop and wrapped the necessary place while the time became less and less. And as soon as it was over, the boy who had just been squirming from a seizure came back to normal. In front of him, Georges saw our hero, who asked him if he was really feeling well. The others in the room were stunned by what had happened. They knew that before, when the boy started to suffer, he always fainted. Raquel Adria, at this moment, felt relieved even though there was still numbness in his body. After that, the system gave out information that the young man had received bonus days for treating the boy. Also, his Azrahan technique had increased. Now the percentage of mana enhancement was greatly increased, and it couldn't help but please our hero. And as Raquel withstood the powerful electrostimulation, and due to this, the metal energy of the lungs and large intestine was activated and the wood element was suppressed. As a result, another organ was awakened in the young man. It was the liver. She swiftly broke into the room with the others and threw her luggage at them. Seeing the newcomer, heart and large intestine were surprised. There was an addition to their team. Large intestine was so happy that he took off his shirt and ran towards liver. However, this did not please the new guy very much. He first looked at the guy with contempt and then slapped him on the cheek. With dumbfounded eyes, Liver looked at Colon and asked if he had decided to die by doing such a thing. The system told Raquel that liver gave him 300 points and the other organs gave him 500 points, as they were delighted with the addition. Our hero was also happy about this and realized that he would probably have even more health points. It was a great day in the young man's opinion. Suddenly, a child's voice distracted him from his thoughts. It was Georges who addressed him. Looking at the crown prince with big round eyes, the boy said that something was wrong with him. Pulling the needle out of Georges' neck, the boy reassured him and said that everything was fine. However, the boy noticed that before, when he felt sick, his eyes would go dark and his body would stop obeying him. Raquel then asked if that surprised him. Georges said yes. Then our hero smiled at him and said it would never happen again. With a twinkle in his eye, the boy asked the prince if it was really so, and the young man confirmed that Georges would never have to suffer that pain again. Raquel Adria also confirmed that if he was lying, the boy would become a prince tomorrow. In the crowd of people stood Georges' sister. She could not believe what had happened and was in tears. When the boy noticed his sister in the crowd, he immediately ran to her. Georges happily hugged the girl and their faces looked very happy. Watching such a beautiful picture from the outside, our hero realized that it was an absolute success. The other people in the room were whispering excitedly. The young man realized that it was time to spread the news of his good deed. Raquel already dreamed that everyone would come to him for treatment, and since he would be able to cure everyone, he would get a lot of bonus lives and ensure a healthy life for himself. But suddenly, the boy's joy was interrupted. The crown prince's eyes began to swim and he saw Gardine's frightened face and Demian approaching him. The boy assumed he was losing consciousness again, and his internal organs confirmed it, all because Raquel Adria had put his body under a lot of stress again. Night fell. At that moment, the guy regained consciousness and opened his eyes. The first thing he wondered was how long he had been out. Turning his head to the side, he noticed Demian the healer and Warlock beside him. With a smile on his face, the young man asked his subordinates if they had so little to do that they decided to watch him sleep. However, this joke did not arouse positive emotions in anyone. Piero Gardine said that he was very tired of seeing the prince in such a state. In tears, the man added that he was tired of hoping that the guy would wake up soon. Continuing to drown in tears, he said that he was praying for the prince. This reaction of Piero Gardine surprised Raquel, and he did not understand why he was crying again. Then Demian explained that the boy had not come to his senses for 2 days. From this, the young man's eyes became completely round. The crown prince could not believe what he had just heard. Then Janitas turned to him and asked him in a sad tone if he was trying to destroy him. The man asked the young man what he would say if he was killed by his magic. In response, our hero apologized and asked for the warlock's forgiveness. Then the guy asked what was with Georges and how he felt. Suddenly, a boy jumped out from behind Demian and happily announced that he was fine. He immediately ran up to the crown prince while laughing. Seeing him, the boy was very surprised and asked how he had gotten here. The boy pointed his finger at the laughing Piero Gradine and said that he had begged him to let him pass. Then Georges added that he wanted to give the boy something when he woke up. From behind his back, the boy took out a beautiful heart pendant. Raquel Adria was dumbfounded and asked if the boy had done it while he was asleep. Looking at the pendant, our hero thought that it was all wrong as he had helped Georges only because he wanted to live. This made the young man feel uneasy. While the crown prince was lost in his thoughts, the boy turned to him and said that he too wanted to become such a wonderful man. Specifically, he said that he would help people as much as the boy. The boy was so inspired by Raquel's action that he wanted to become like him. From such a statement, our hero was at a loss. Looking at the pendant again, the boy said that it was very well made and thanked Georges for it. But then Raquel Adria said that the best reward for him was to see the boy healthy. Piero Gardine smiled approvingly when he heard this. Then the boy coughed and said he was tired. He wanted to rest some more. So all the people in his room immediately decided to leave and let His Highness recover his strength. Georges followed behind everyone, and before leaving the bedroom, he turned around to face the prince and said a cheerful goodbye. Our hero similarly smiled and waved back at the boy and said that they would see soon. After the door slammed shut, the smile disappeared from the boy's face, and he began to look at the pendant Georges had given him. As he hung the pendant on his finger and continued to look at it, he couldn't imagine who would wear such a thing. The jewelry was too simple and without precious stone. However, his musings were short-lived. Raquel Adria Magentano decided to sleep after all. Turning on his side, he fell asleep sweetly, and around his neck hung a gift from a boy. After a while, one of His Highness's servants came home. His mother was very surprised at this. The woman asked what was the reason for his return. In response, the young man smiled and said that he was on vacation. There was a scroll in this bag, and the boy added that he was on a special vacation. A little later, the young man and his parents sat down at the table. His mom couldn't believe that suddenly the crown prince had given her son 5 days off. The boy said that many of the crown prince's employees were given such a vacation. His father then asked how Raquel's health was. The young man replied that he was feeling better than before. The man was glad to hear that. Then the boy's face changed and he said that it might be because His Majesty had been doing strange things lately. His parents didn't quite understand what these words meant and asked their son about it. Then the boy said that he was always making people heal and took out a folded paper from his bag. When the man and the woman unfolded it and looked at what it said, they were very surprised. Leaflets like this were distributed all over the city. It was written that a traditional medicine clinic of the Crown Prince's palace was opening where everything could be cured. People were intrigued by this announcement, and Raquel Adria was happy that the news had probably already spread. At that moment, Piero Gardin entered his office and said that it was time for them to go. Then our hero turned to the man, gave him a smile, and said he was ready. Walking down the corridor, the healer asked the boy why he got up so early. The young man replied that today was the opening day of their traditional medicine clinic. The man then said that he had bought all the ingredients that the Crown Prince had asked for. He also added that he had taken special care to buy the licorice that the young man had also asked for. Our hero thanked the healer for his assistance and said that they would need a lot of things. At this point, Piero Gardin decided to ask something. The man had long been interested in how the young man had learned all this. But Raquel, pretending not to understand, decided to clarify what his assistant was talking about. Then the healer asked how the prince learned to make those strange potions, or how he treats people with painful joints by poking needles into them. Gardin was so curious because he was a doctor himself. He also admitted that he didn't sleep well because he was trying to understand the guy's techniques. But the healer couldn't do it and was very frustrated. Looking at Gardin, the young man assumed that he must have felt very miserable because he couldn't even guess the principles of the medical techniques he was practicing. And Raquel understood the man's feelings as he was also a doctor. So afterwards, he confessed that he was from another world. Hearing this, Gardin was puzzled. Then the guy confessed that he was not a prince there, but an ordinary man named Li Han. He said that he made his living using traditional medicine methods that he practiced now. Then Piero Gardin looked at the young man with a downcast look and said that he had brought it up with him after serious consideration. Rubbing the back of his head, the prince smiled and replied that that was why he wanted to tell him the truth. And the man added that he would be sad if the young man didn't. The healer also asked the boy to stop teasing him. He said that he wanted to become the best doctor and wanted to share the joy that His Highness felt. After listening to the man, Raquel Adria asked him what he was doing before all this. The healer was a bit confused by such a question. However, our hero did not clarify his words and turned around and asked to start their work. And the guy at this point thought that he was able to go so far only because Piero Gardin helped him. In addition, the young man hoped that on the opening day of the clinic they would have not only roomers but also patients. He was very worried that people might not come because it was the palace where the crown prince lived. From such thoughts, Raquel Adria began to think that he was beginning to have post-traumatic syndrome. Going to the window, the boy prayed that there would be many patients on the street, and finally opening the windows, the young man greeted the people with joy. But looking into the courtyard, our hero saw no one. There was not a single person on the street near the Crown Prince's palace. Frantically descending the steps, the guy realized that he was again in the gap. At that moment, Piero Gardin turned his head to the side and called out to Raquel Adria. He asked the young man to look below. Without any hope, the young man turned and was amazed at what he saw. On the street stood a crowd of people who wanted to get to the prince's reception as soon as possible. Then our hero realized that he was saved. After a while, the guy was already examining patients. He realized that the first day would be very busy. While Raquel Adria was feeling the pulse of one of the men, a servant came up to him who was a bit agitated. He apologized to the prince for distracting him and asked what he should do. And the guy gave him the task to go and see if they had any patients who needed help. Our hero realized that the nursing system was not that good, and it would take time to get things right. At that moment, the system said that his pulse listening skill level had increased. Now, the young man could consult the patient's internal organs for diagnosis. Raquel was shocked by this. Meanwhile, the internal organs were already involved in measuring the patient's pulse, and the heart and the rest of the organs were on their way to blind dates. The lungs were very excited about this event, and the heart was saying that it had already told someone that they were not interested in those with whom they were 4 years apart. The large intestine was also excited and said he never misses a blind date, and behind him was liver, and he asked the guys to come to their senses. He didn't like the whole thing since they were going to have a meeting with the old people. After that, Raquel got a notification about what problems his patient was having. The liver said that he found signs of hepatitis in the man and advised him to stop drinking. Our hero did not expect such a thing and was very amazed that the patient had a drinking problem. The guy admired the conclusion from the internal organs as nothing was more important in treatment than an accurate diagnosis. He realized that he should wake up the other organs as well. Raquel Adria then told the patient that he had a big problem with his liver. This stunned the man, and the young man explained that this is why he was tired all the time and had a yellowish complexion. The prince prescribed the man a decoction of Volodushka, and from today completely forbade him to drink alcohol. and this almost made the patient faint. Then Raquel said that his liver was badly damaged, and if the man continued, he wouldn't live for 5 years. The patient wanted to deny this, and the young man guessed that he wanted to say that he could not eat without alcohol. In this case, our hero decided to order the man to stop drinking not on behalf of the doctor, but on behalf of the crown prince. The guy said that if he didn't fulfill the order, he would put him in the dungeon. That was the end of the working day for today. The young man said that all non-critical patients would be admitted tomorrow. Piero Gardin then thanked Raquel Adria for his labor, and the maid apologized for not being able to prepare the medicine properly. But the guy said that all the guys did a good job. He realized that since there were no nurses here, and there would be a lot of patients requiring nursing care, they would have problems. Raquel thought they needed a stable nursing system that could take care of patients 24 hours a day. At this moment, the young man remembered Kim and Lee from his world. Suddenly, quick footsteps were heard in the hallway. Piero Gardin opened the door and said that they had an emergency patient. Behind him stood a boy who was the eldest son of the Din Rai family. On his shoulders lay a very healthy-looking woman. It was the young man's mother whom he had asked to save. After a while, she was placed on the bed. Our hero noticed that the woman had a high fever and asked how long she had been in this condition. The worried young man replied that it had been since noon, and before that the woman had been fine. The boy added that his mother had said that she had been suffering from chills since sunset. After these words, the woman had reached such a state. Meanwhile, our hero was already running diagnostics. And so, Raquel Adria realized that this disease that had overcome the woman had destroyed Napoleon's army of 400,000. When the crown prince learned this, he was at a loss. The disease was called epidemic typhus. It's an acute febrile and fatal disease caused by infection with the bacterium Rickettsia. The guy turned to the liver and asked if he was sure, to which the organ said yes, and added that he had seen Rickettsia bacteria in the blood penetrate the old lady's liver. These words did not please our hero at all, and he did not know how to tell her son. Then Raquel turned to the boy and asked how long the patient had been taking a bath. This question seemed rather strange to the young man, and he even asked him if he had just heard it. The crown prince said that it was an important question for determining the patient's condition. Then the boy said that his mother had taken a bath yesterday, as she does daily. Raquel found it surprising that a person who takes a bath every day somehow contracted typhus, so he asked the young man how their house was organized, and especially the bedding. But the boy said everything was clean and neat. Then the prince asked if the patient had been together where there were fleas or lice. At this point, the young man thought for a moment, and suddenly, he remembered that a week or two ago his mother had been in a place where she might have encountered something like that. He said that at that time his mom's carriage broke down on the way from a relative's house and she had to stop for the night at a nearby farmhouse. He was told that the couple had given her a bed. Our hero began to reflect afterward. He realized that the woman's fever had started today, and most likely the hour was just the incubation period. And he was once again convinced that it was fully consistent with the symptoms of typhus. Then Raquel turned to the young man and said that that was probably when the woman was infected. Hearing this, the boy was dumbfounded. The crown prince told about typhus and added that this disease is transmitted by lice that attach themselves to the human skin and suck blood. Looking at the woman, our hero realized that things were bad as the patient was elderly with a high fever. Raquel was horrified to realize that in the worst-case scenario, she was in danger of pneumonia, central nervous system damage, or even necrosis of the limbs. So he turned to his servants and asked them to listen to him more carefully. The boy ordered them to remove all the clothes from the woman and wipe her body with towels moistened with warm water. After that, the young man asked them to put a patient's robe on her. At that moment, one of the servants raised her hand and asked what to do with the woman's clothes. Our hero replied that it should be burned and the same should be done with the bed. In addition, Raquel asked them to take a bath and burn their clothes. In a serious tone, the crown prince said that if anyone disobeyed him, they would be dismissed and punished immediately. At these words, the maids trembled and stammered and replied that they would carry out Raquel Adria's orders. Then the prince turned to the woman's son and said that this applied to him as well. He asked the lad to send someone home and report it. As his subordinates stood still after giving them their assignment, Raquel roared, and with a wave of his hand, he chased them to carry out the order. They immediately ran out of the room with their heels blazing. After a while, our hero stood in the kitchen and thought that the best remedy would be kudzu root soup, which is excellent for fever. Kudzu root soup is an antipyretic pain reliever made from ephedra and kudzu root itself. With this concoction, the boy went to the woman and started to drink it. The young man said that she would feel better if she drank it slowly. So day and night, the servants of our hero were constantly hanging around the infected woman. But at one point, Raquel Adria noticed that she was not getting better from the fact that she was being cared for around the clock by maids in 3 shifts. It was the opposite. The constant fever was wearing her down. Then the guy realized that soup alone was not the answer. He realized that the balance of yin and yang was completely out of balance. Her yin was severely depleted. So first, the crown prince decided to restore it. Raquel thought of a medicinal plant with powerful yin energy. He needed something special. The young man was so angry that it wasn't working that he threatened his organs and ordered them to think. But they giggled mockingly and said they were stupid. From this, Raquel said that those were useless at times like this. And as soon as he said those words in his head, it hit him. With a smile on his face, our hero turned to Piero Gardin and asked him to prepare the carriage. The boy was going to the vault of the Imperial Palace, where all sorts of rare treasures and artifacts are kept. Although he wasn't quite sure about this decision, it was the most likely option. No one but the emperor could enter the palace, and it was very difficult to gain access to the vault. But since Raquel Adria Magentano was the crown prince, he decided to take advantage of it. After a while, our hero arrived at Asterion Testarossa and bowed to the rightful ruler of the empire. It was obvious from the man's face that he was not happy about such a guest as the young man. He frowned his eyebrows and asked Raquel why he had come at such a late hour. The boy was not exactly happy to be here either, as every time the emperor radiated an overwhelming sense of pressure when they met. Despite such emotions, the crown prince replied that he had come to him because he wanted to gain access to the vault of the imperial palace. Hearing this, Asterion smiled slightly and asked what purpose the young man wanted to accomplish. Sighing heavily, Raquel said that he had recently opened a clinic in the palace and they had quite a few patients coming in. He said that 3 days ago, a noble lady came to them with a serious illness. Showing indifference, the man asked what this had to do with the vault, and the young man explained that it might contain the ingredients necessary for her treatment. Smiling wryly, the emperor said he was not sure if the boy was telling him the truth. He asked if the prince was using the patient as an excuse to gain access to the vault for his own personal use. At this point, the man was jubilant that Raquel had decided to ask his permission first. Our hero, on the other hand, didn't like the whole thing. He thought the old man was making things difficult on purpose. The guy has already experienced all the difficulties of this life, but to convince his own father was even more difficult. Then Raquel Adria got up from his knees and said that they had no time to argue as the patient was on the verge of death. Then the emperor frowned even more and asked the boy what confirmed the correctness of his diagnosis. He recalled that the prince had been bedridden and uneducated for most of his youth. Now, it seemed strange to Asterion that the lad had gone into medicine. The man shouted that he wasn't sure if the lad was taking proper care of the patient or if his diagnosis was accurate. Upon hearing this, our hero realized that Asterion Testarossa wished to test him. Smiling at the emperor, Raquel asked if his guess was correct and the man proudly said yes. The emperor said the test would be simple. Captain Roberto, standing next to Asterion, had recently begun to suffer from a slight ailment. The man asked the young man to diagnose him and tell him what ailment was affecting their captain of the guard. The emperor added that if the prince passed the test, he would give him access to the vault. Raquel then approached the captain and began to feel his pulse. Asterion gloated and thought that the guy would never be able to complete the task as it was a secret known only to Roberto, his wife, and him. After a couple of seconds, our hero looked at the captain and asked if he really had nest baldness. Hearing this, both men went into shock. Then the emperor stood up from his throne and, pointing his finger at the trembling Roberto, asked Raquel to see how thick his hair was. At first, the boy looked at Asterion without emotion and then pulled the wig off the captain and smiled. Roberto, with a bald head at that moment, wanted only to stop being bullied. Tears sprang from his eyes. Leaving the bewildered emperor and crying captain, our hero went together with Demian to the vault of the imperial palace. Walking down the corridor, the gladiator asked the prince if it was too much to take off Roberto's wig. However, Raquel was so pleased with himself that he said it didn't matter, and he would take care of it later. After a while, the guys were already standing near the beautiful vault doors. Meanwhile, Roberto was still standing in tears and asked the emperor why he didn't ask the guy how to treat it. Calming the man, Asterion suggested him to go to Raquel's palace for a personal consultation. And at the gate of the vault, our hero was met by guards. One of them approached the young man and handed him a beautiful card with an hourglass. It was a pass to the vault, which had to be worn to go inside. And if you didn't, the guard said it would activate attack magic. In addition, this card is used to enter the time allotted to stay inside the vault. The man said that if the guys exceeded that time, they would be very bad. He smiled and made gestures around his neck that were not sedative. The guard also asked them to pay attention to the fact that they were supposed to be in the vault until sunrise. This made Raquel furious. Looking at his watch, he realized that they only had a few hours left. So, not wanting to waste precious time, he rushed to the gate and called Demian after him. The guard got scared and started shouting to His Highness that the entrance to the upper level zone. The young man felt embarrassed by this remark, and rubbing the back of his head with a smile on his face, he apologized to the man for the ridiculous mistake. However, after that, the young man's smile disappeared. He realized that his trick hadn't worked. Sometime before, Asterion Testarossa had allowed our hero to visit the lower levels of the vault and take one item. Hearing this, Raquel Adria was surprised. Noticing this reaction, the emperor asked the young man if there was something wrong with it. The crown prince didn't seem to mind, but it wasn't what he expected. After all, he had worked hard and only got access to the lower floors. However, the emperor smiled wryly in response and said that it didn't look like the guy was straining. Our hero didn't really like that the man changed his words after he passed the test and tried to convey that to him. But Asterion wasn't about to give in to the prince. And now, following to the lower levels, Raquel Adria pondered if he was really wanted to be helped by the emperor. Applying the pass to the right place, the young man thought that if he didn't need anything from the man, it was better not to come here. At that moment, the gate began to open. The guard behind them said they would meet later. Once inside, Raquel was excited and even said he would have to stay up all night for this. The time on their passes began to dwindle. Our hero turned to Damien and said that this is where they should find the thing he needed. In response, the boy asked what he was looking for. Then the prince explained that they needed something cold like all the reagent items, magical beads that have icy properties. The boy also asked Damien to write down the location of the item if he could find it, and he would look for it later. Because the room was too big, Raquel suggested that the boy split up. So looking through the shelves of different items, our hero came to the conclusion that he couldn't find anything special. He assumed that this was because they were on the lower levels of the vault. And the young man hoped that Damien Kane had better luck in his search. After a while they met, and the gladiator gave the prince a sheet with the location of the items. Looking at the notes, Raquel Adria was slightly perturbed as he didn't understand what the guy had written. Having sorted it out, they followed along. In this whole huge place, Demina found only one ice-type item, and that was their only hope. The item was called Eternal Frost. When its wielder used mana, the central core transformed it to create an ice shield, but an ice shield collapses if it takes a lot of damage. Examining the item, Raquel Adria noticed that it was very similar to those calls from the cafe. After reading the description of the Eternal Frost, the guy decided to take it in his hands. The item was very cold, and to use it, he had to inject his mana into it. As soon as the prince did so, the Eternal Frost vibrated. This made Raquel think even more that it was just a call from the cafe, and he should run to get his order now. The intensity of the vibration varied depending on the concentration of mana, so it wasn't worth pouring it in at random, and it took a certain amount of mana to create an ice shield. Concentrating on the object and the infusion of mana, Raquel remembered how in his normal life he adjusted the shower so that the water was not too cold or too hot. And after a few good attempts, our hero managed to create an ice shield. There was no limit to his joy. The young man rejoiced that despite the size of the shield, it was not heavy at all. And this cold coming from it made the prince delighted. Our hero was happy that he had a chance to cure Mrs. Dinray. With happy eyes, the young man turned towards the gladiator and said that he needed his help again. Damien couldn't even guess what the prince had in mind. Raquel said they would come back to this later, but now it was time for him to get his bonus lives. That surprised the gladiator, and then the prince corrected himself and said that he meant to treat the patient. As soon as the guys came out of the low level of the vault, the guard saw them and asked if they were leaving already. Then he looked at Damien Kane and asked, the thing they decided to take was a sword. At that moment, the voice of the prince was heard from outside. He shouted to the gladiator that he didn't realize what he was doing. With a dismissive tone, the young man said that he was disappointed in him. The guard looked at Raquel and noticed that he was fully dressed in various things from the vault. The man said that the boy would have to put it all back. Meanwhile, Piero Gardin was sleeping sweetly in his bed, but suddenly he was awakened by a strange noise outside the window. The healer got out of bed and saw that Raquel and Damien were standing in the courtyard, discussing something heatedly. Gardin was glad that the boy had already returned to the palace, and he was also pleased that he was getting along well with the gladiator. Looking at them, the man thought about the fact that Damien seemed to him to be a rough and unyielding guy, but in fact he was doing an excellent job protecting the crown prince. The physician was pleased that His Highness, who had been bedridden since his youth, had now found a friend like Damien to lean on. Approaching the boys, the man decided that he could probably trust the gladiator a little more. Suddenly, Piero Gardin stopped and noticed that our hero had pulled out the Eternal Frost and Damien was pulling out his sword. The healer didn't realize what was going on. After that, the guy jumped up from his seat and moved with an attack towards Raquel. Seeing this, the spread with the teapot and cups flew out of Gardin's hands. He clutched his face in horror and started shouting that everything was a conspiracy. And a few minutes before what happened, our hero was talking to Damien and asked him to listen carefully. Looking into the eyes of the crown prince, the guy thought that if he helps patients from the bottom of his heart, he will not hesitate to follow him no matter what the orders are. Then Raquel Adria made a cute face and asked the gladiator to strike him with his sword. This request made Damien feel as if something inside him broke. He thought that the young man had lost his mind, and the prince continued to ask the boy to do so, telling him to hit the ice shield until it shattered. At this point, Damien Kane's respect for our hero diminished by a gram. It was after this that Piero Gardin, sleeping in his room, awoke. and heard a noise outside the window. While the man was looking through the window, smiling, watching the guys they were arguing heatedly, Gladiator asked if he wanted to make a traitor out of him like that. But Raquel said that if the boy breaks the shield, then Mrs. Dinray will survive. And based on that, the young man added that their clinic will not go bankrupt and the royal family will not fail. In the end, our hero said that everyone will survive in this situation. Raquel kept smiling at Damien while he tried to understand what the crown prince was thinking when he asked him that. Then the gladiator said he wanted a more detailed explanation. Then the prince explained that he wanted to use the ice crystals that are formed when the shield is damaged in the cure. After that, Damien thought for a moment. After a bit of thought, the guy asked why not put the shield on the ground so he could just strike. In response, our hero kept smiling at the gladiator and said that it was impossible. He demonstrated how the shield appears and disappears. Almost in tears, Raquel said he needed to infuse mana to maintain the ice shield. To summarize, Damien realized that he needed to somehow break the shield but not hurt the young man. The crown prince appreciated his friend's cleverness and smiled at him again. However, the boy still hesitated and said that this could be considered an act of treason. Outraged, Damien Kane said that he would never agree to such a thing without any compensation. He insistently asked Raquel to give him a special bonus for every hit on his shield. That was the first rule of salary negotiation. You always had to hit first to win. Hearing this, our hero with a sly smile clarified to the gladiator if he really wanted him to pay him for the guy to beat him. Damien confidently answered yes. Putting his hand on his heart, he said that he would consider the young man his benefactor and added that he admired the prince for taking care of people without expecting anything in return. Despite all this, however, the gladiator said he needed a paycheck. At that moment, Raquel looked silently at the guy and his mind was spinning with thoughts. After all, our hero realized that the reason for all the misfortunes of Damien Kane was money. The young man remembered that the guy even in the novel was a miser. A smile flashed across Raquel's face. Embracing Damien, the crown prince said that he was just like he had read. Our hero complimented that he understood the gladiator was like that. But in person, Raquel noticed that he was even more brilliant. Damien did not understand what the crown prince was talking about and remained silent. The young man activated his shield and said he would pay him a day's wages for each strike. Taking his sword out of its sheath and swinging it at Raquel, the gladiator only asked him to make timely payment. This was the picture Piero Gardin saw when he approached the boys. Not knowing all their dialogue, the man was frightened and lost consciousness. But the guys didn't even notice it. The force that Damien put into the Audra was not enough to break the shield, so he suggested the prince to try again. And he was squirming badly at the same time. This surprised the gladiator since he hadn't even struck yet. In response, Raquel asked Damien to strike sooner. Then, without wasting any time, the guy swung his sword again and struck the eternal frost. However, even after such an attack, the shield did not collapse. Our hero already looked rather weakened. At that moment, Damien thought that he should probably hit even harder, and Raquel couldn't contain his emotions and assumed that the gladiator was just trying to get more money this way. But this time, Damien Kane decided that he was going to do the right thing. After that, the guy swung his sword at Raquel again, and the gladiator really didn't cheat. He delivered his next blow to the shield and it shattered. From this, a joyful smile appeared on the prince's face. Our hero began to jump on the spot because their scheme had worked. The young man was already dreaming of longevity, success, and everything like that. Then Raquel turned to Damien and said that they should collect the crystals and run away. As they turned toward the palace, they noticed Garden lying on the ground. The prince was surprised that he was sleeping outside. After a while, the young man was in the kitchen preparing a tonic soup made from kudzu root. While doing so, he was listing all of its contents. After that, the young man decided to add the last important ingredient. It was ice crystals. The prince also added them to the circle slot. As soon as our hero did this, the system said that the lad's brave attempt was a great experience for him. He had a new skill of potion making unlocked. This meant that the potions he created would become 10% more effective than normal potions. Later, the system said that the prince had created a new recipe for tonic soup made from kudzu root. At that moment, Heart of our hero happily handed him the soup he had made and asked if Raquel wanted to analyze the ingredients. And the guy, of course, could not refuse such an offer and happily agreed. From the analysis, the young man learned how many times to consume the soup, its properties and precautions. The prince liked this skill very much, because now he did not need to test the medicine on himself. In addition, the soup could restore chi energy. The young man was already anticipating the moment when he would save Lady Dinray. After a while, our hero, together with the soup, came to the room where the woman was lying. There he was met by Mrs. Dinray's very excited son. On seeing him, Raquel asked him how the patient was feeling. The boy replied with a downcast look that she was still weak. Looking at the woman, the boy noticed that her energy level had dropped even more. Dipping a spoon into the icy soup, our hero hoped that this medicine would help Lady Dinray. Then holding out the spoon to the woman, he warned her that the soup was a bit cold and asked her to drink it. The woman remarked that the medicine was very bitter, to which Raquel replied that the more bitter it was, the more effective it was. After that, the crown prince and the others just waited for the result and went on with their normal lives. After 10 days, all of Raquel Adria's subordinates were shocked that the prince personally prepared the medicine and fed it to the patient. They didn't realize if the young man had always been like this. The servants knew that the young man used to be a sensitive fool, but now he had completely changed. At this moment, Piero Gardin looked at the boy with delight and, as usual, with tears in his eyes, and said that he had always believed in him. And while his subordinates were praising him, Raquel himself could hardly hold on. He was exhausted by the constant checkups and preparation of medicines. But for the reward, he forced himself to endure. The system then informed him that he had successfully cured the typhus outbreak with kudzu root ice soup. It also said that everyone who had been watching was showing him their respect. In addition, Raquel now has the bonus attribute healing account. The effectiveness of the skill increased by 1.5 times. This really surprised our hero, since applying the bonus effect for the treatment of Mrs. Dinray, the young man's life was prolonged by 8 days. At this point, the prince realized that having earned the respect and admiration of others, the number of bonus lives he would receive would skyrocket. With an obsessive laugh, our hero was already imagining how things would change, and he was ready to mislead the people around him further. After a while, Raquel Adria was riding in his carriage and thinking about the future. The guy realized that he had done well this time, but he couldn't run the clinic alone. He still needed nurses. Arriving at the site, Mrs. Dinray and her son got out of the carriage. The woman looked very well and thanked the prince for curing her and bringing her home on top of that. She didn't even know how to thank the young man, but our hero smiled and thought that she had done everything that was required of her. And he told the woman that for him was the most important thing that she recovered. These words caused a storm of emotion in Piero Gardina and the Dinray family. They found this response very touching. After that, the woman and her son bowed to our hero and began to say goodbye to him, wishing him a happy journey. However, the young man started waving his hand and stood up from his seat and said that he would like to talk to one of them. Raquel's gaze was directed towards the boy. He was very surprised and could not refuse the prince. Our hero put the young man in the coachman's seat. The boy was even more confused and asked if they really had to sit and talk in such positions. Raquel said yes, because that was the only way he could tell him what he wanted to say. And he thought to himself that in the new world, that was the way they did it. There was silence in the carriage. Dinray's son became even more worried and nervously adjusted his collar. Then our hero exhaled heavily and with a grunt began to complain that he was in pain. In a protracted tone, he said that he had been courting a woman for a very long time and had had many sleepless nights. At that moment, the young man guessed what the crown prince wanted from him. Without wasting time, he turned to Raquel and said that he would like to compensate him for his efforts. However, our hero reminded the lad that he was treating for free. Dinray's son still insisted on gratitude, and then the prince said that he did not treat him. These words alarmed the boy. He was already afraid of what Raquel Adria might say now. Meanwhile, the prince was already looking at the young man's file and realized that he was drawing. Then, looking into the mirror in the carriage, Raquel turned to him and said that he wanted him to work with him on a case. A few days later, 2 men were standing near a stall in Frontera Square. One asked the other if he knew some news. Since the answer was no, the man said that the crown prince was looking for people to work in the palace. But the other didn't understand why he needed this information, to which his acquaintance smilingly said that he had just been unemployed for 5 years. This dialogue was between the owner and his employee. The man told the guy that he was 2 payments behind. The young man turned around and said he'd bring him his money right away. As the boy rushed to get the payment, a suspicious hooded stranger stood next to him. At the same place in a huge building, there was an exhibition of the eldest son of the Dinray family that was open to everyone. There were a lot of people at the exhibition, and most of them gathered around one painting. Our hero was also present there, and he was congratulating the guy on his debut. Dinray's son was very embarrassed and thanked for the words said by the prince. And Raquel Adria noticed that there was something wrong with the boy and asked him what was wrong. He hesitated a bit as he tried to find the right words. There were paintings of the prince and his subordinates on display. In one picture, Raquel was in tears. Demian was looking at it, and holding his sword, he wanted to chop it up. And because of this, the eldest son of Dinray was embarrassed and seemed to be deceiving others. But the young man responded by calming him down and telling him that everyone does this in Photoshop. For a minute, the guy didn't even know what Photoshop was. He asked if the artwork would really help the prince, and Raquel answered with a confident yes. As the entire crowd gathered around one of the paintings, it depicted the nurses and our hero, and at the bottom it said, "Show me Gan Ho." Because the exhibition was free, most people came here for that reason, and as soon as they saw this painting, they looked at it with eyes of utter bewilderment. Then one of the men noticed an inscription next to it. There was an appeal to the guests saying that they too could become an angel in white and become a nurse. Some of the girls got excited about it, and after a while a crowd gathered near the nursing staff selection desk. Standing in line, people were discussing the good salary for such a job. One of the guys even cried. Throwing his head up, he promised his mom to become a nurse and repay her for everything. And standing next to him was the hooded stranger. After reading the application requirements, he was very angry as the applicant must live in the imperial capital. Watching this, he was delighted. Demian stood next to him and asked if the young man was really that happy. Wiping his drool and removing his silly smile, Raquel Adria returned his serious look and said, "Why not be happy about it?" The prince told the gladiator that if they attract a talented medical staff, they would be able to take many more patients. So after that, our hero got down on one knee and started to sing a serenade about how he could not be happy about it. But what made the young man happiest of all was the fact that bonus lives awaited him. Looking at the shining crown prince, Demian Kane was once again convinced that he was truly incredible. He also liked that Raquel paid well. 6 days after the exhibition, there were again a bunch of people outside the prince's palace, and they were all waiting for the Show Me Gan Ho event. And among them was again a mysterious stranger, but this time this non-human did not hide his face. Beneath the black cloak was a young girl who was glad to be here. After a couple of minutes, one of our hero's subordinates took the microphone and announced that they would begin the first task of the medical staff selection test. He announced that the presenter was the crown prince. The man was so grandiose in his announcement. His charisma was unmatched. While he was talking, he had time to stand in various poses. In the end, the man said that the first task would be announced next week. Time passed. Another day came. The same man stood on the stage and again said that the organizer and sponsor was Imperial Highness Raquel Adria Magnetano. Again, as if delaying time, he announced the first task and called the people to the interview venue. Some of the people in the crowd already thought they had been hearing about the same thing for a week. As the people approached the right place, they were met by another man from the Crown Prince's team. He told them that they would all be divided into 5 groups of 50 people to take the test. The man said that they would all go from here to the main building of the Crown Prince's palace, and he added that only the first 10 candidates from each group would be invited for an interview. The people were shocked by this. They didn't understand what would happen to the other 40. Then the man explained that those who would not make it to the top 10 would be eliminated from the game. Although many of the participants thought it was nonsense, they ran to the main building of the palace. A few minutes later, the challenge was over. Piero Gardin waved his hand to show that the right number of people had already reached the finish line. The crowd was all exhausted. Only the heavy grunting of the participants could be heard in the neighborhood. The healer said that even though the guys had worked hard, they would proceed to the next stage. The second task was for each of the participants to choose from the 6 medicines on the table, the ones that had gone bad due to improper storage. After that, the guys started the task and began to try everything that was on the table. At that moment, the mysterious man in the cloak began to breathe strangely. Then he suddenly fell to the ground. At the loud sound, all the participants of the trial turned around. People were slightly startled that someone had lost consciousness. Especially in their minds was a struggle whether to help this person or not to be distracted. However, no one rushed to help the mysterious participant because the test was more important to everyone. Raquel stood back and watched the scene. After a while, the test was over. Piero Gardin said that he was pleased that everyone was focused. He said he would let them know the results later. After that, the participants headed for the exit, while the man in the cloak remained on the ground. As soon as the courtyard was empty, the crown prince and the healer approached the body and said that he could get up. Underneath the black cloak was Demian Kane. Rising to his feet, he said that he had managed to fool everyone. In response, our hero said he was a little worried that it might seem overly dramatic. And after that, Raquel Adria began to demonstrate how he saw the situation and show his artistry. What the young man showed now seemed more natural to him. Watching the crown prince, Piero Gardin wept again as the boy could do it all. Then our hero said that thanks to Demian's play, he was able to appreciate the contestants. Raquel stated that they all failed. He said that technique can always be learned, and the gladiator, guessing what the young man wanted to say, added that the character of people is more important, and that was really true. At this rate, the second group followed the qualifying trials. There were also those who did not pass on, and the same situation was in the third group and the fourth. Watching what was happening, the crown prince was in complete shock. He couldn't believe that no one cared about the unconscious man. After that, Raquel Adria suggested Demian to take a walk, and he agreed. Rubbing his chin, the young man realized that there were no more applicants and didn't know what to do. Then he heard an argument nearby. At the gate, a guard was arguing with a girl and proving to her that she wasn't human. This surprised our hero very much. The red-haired girl stubbornly proved that she was human, but the guard could not be persuaded. Rolling up his shirt sleeves, Raquel was angry and asked why he dared to talk like that when they didn't have enough candidates. Then standing behind Demian said that the girl was a werewolf. The young man couldn't believe it since she didn't have a tail, but the gladiator said that it just couldn't be seen because of the baggy pants. After that, The crown prince calmed his fervor. At this point, Damien assumed that even Raquel didn't like werewolves. But in fact, our hero was remembering the advantages of werewolves. They could reincarnate easily, had a hardy body, and a sniff like a dog. Drooling from his mouth, the guy decided that the girl was perfect for the role of a nurse in his clinic, and Damien realized he'd been worried for nothing. At that moment, the girl was still arguing with the guard, and proving that she was a citizen like him protected by the laws of the Empire. And the man mocked her and said that she also loses her mind when she turns into a beast. This made the girl's jaw clench, and through her teeth she added that it was prejudice. The girl said it would never happen, but the guard still didn't believe her and asked why she was already looking at him with the eyes of a terrible beast. Clenching her hands into a fist and gritting her teeth, the girl wanted to do something, but at that second, Raquel Adria came up to them and asked them to stop. The prince turned to the guard and said that in the brochure for the recruitment of nurses, he had clearly stated that anyone from the imperial capital could apply. The young man said that even though the girl was a werewolf, she fit the qualities they needed. Raquel also asked the man to apologize to the girl and not to him. After the lecture, the boy turned to the stranger and apologized to her for his soldier. In response, the girl introduced herself as Anis and said that she was Hashito's daughter. Then our hero asked if it was true that she wanted to become a nurse. After waiting for an affirmative answer, he asked her to take the test. When Anis heard this, she was confused. The young man turned to her and said that since she was a werewolf, she had to be very tough. However, he had not seen it with his own eyes. Raquel said that if the girl defeated the offending soldier in the race, the first test would be passed. This was something the guard could not have expected and was shocked. The guy suggested that they run to the fountain, which was 400 meters away. He said that whoever gets there first and comes back will be the winner. When Anis heard the task, she sharply pulled off her cloak and joyfully declared that she was ready. At that moment, our hero turned to the guard and asked why he was standing still. He ordered the soldier to get ready as well. Taking off all his armor and remaining only in his underwear, the man assumed a pose for the start. Each of them preparing for the race was determined to win and did not want to give in to their opponent. After a couple minutes, the crown prince started counting down. As soon as he waved the red flag, the boys immediately ran to the fountain. With an incredible lead, Anis was ahead of the guard. Watching this, Raquel was absolutely delighted with the girl's speed. She quickly ran 400 meters and grabbed the pole inside the fountain and deftly spun around to run backwards. Returning to the finish line on the way, Anis met her rival. He was looking at the girl with frightened eyes. Running past him, she realized that the man was too slow and victory was definitely in her hands. At that moment, the guard's mind was also full of thoughts. He must have been so caught up in them that he twisted his leg and rolled on the ground. Anis noticed this with her side vision and assumed that he had dislocated his shoulder. Just before the finish line, the girl turned around and ran towards her opponent. Of course, she wanted a stunning victory, but her other side said otherwise. Running up to the soldier, Anis grabbed his shoulder. The man didn't realize what was happening and began to panic, but the girl didn't listen to him. Asking him to shut up, she put his shoulder back in place. Seeing this, our hero immediately ran up to her. With delight, he said that it was exactly what he was looking for. Anis did not understand what he was talking about and looked at the prince with a questioning expression. He smilingly gave her his hand with a pendant from Georges and said that she was accepted. In the evening of the same day, the girl was already sitting in the study. Raquel Adria put the contract in front of her and asked her to read it carefully. Anis took the sheets and started to read them, but almost immediately said that the contract was a bit complicated. However, our hero asked her not to worry and told her to read more calmly. At that moment, Piero Gardin noticed that the prince began to behave like a middle-aged man. It seemed strange to him. Watching the focused girl, the guy realized that her physical abilities were incredible. He also liked Anis's character very much, but he could not get one moment out of his head. Raquel saw the girl smiling as she repaired her opponent's shoulder. Even though Anis helped the man, she did it very painfully. Also, the guy knew that they had a lot of difficult patients who could complain about it later. And that couldn't help but disappoint our hero. Sighing heavily, he realized that he needed more of the same talented people. After a while, Raquel turned to Anis and asked her how she felt about the terms of their contract. The girl said that everything was fine, but she wanted to add a few more conditions. At these words, the young man tensed up a bit and stammered and asked what Anis wanted to add. Then she said that she was actually the leader of a clan of about 50 people. Hearing this, the prince was very surprised. And then an undisguised smile appeared on his face. He couldn't believe his happiness. Anis had 50 people like her in her clan. Walking up to the girl, Raquel Adria put his hands on her shoulders and said that this was the place to start. In his thoughts, the prince realized that no one would be able to resist 50 S-class members. At that moment, Anis looked at the guy and asked him to let her fellow clansmen take the exam as well. Our hero was already anticipating the S-class people working in his clinic. The girl also asked Raquel to solve a problem their tribe had been facing since birth. The young man was surprised again. He thought they were short of food since the problem was congenital, but Anis immediately dismissed the prince's assumption. She said that because of this, her clan was at a great disadvantage in society. The girl said that their problem was the tail. Such a statement dumbfounded the lad. Then Anis explained that it was because their tail did not move according to their wishes. However, Raquel Adria still didn't understand what the problem was and why it was bad. Anis bowed her head and said that because of this, they simply could not hide their emotions. And at that moment, the prince realized that most likely all werewolves were easy targets for cheaters because their emotions were always obvious. Then the young man asked the girl if that was why she was wearing loose pants. She was indeed. But even that didn't help, as the tail waved with such force in moments of joy that it was impossible to hide it, and Raquel asked if it would have the same effect if she tied the tail to her leg. The girl replied that it would still find its way out. Hearing this, our hero suggested that their tail is like a separate muscle that lives by its own rules. In that case, the young man asked if they had not tried to cut off the tail altogether. Anis said that it didn't help either, as she couldn't walk normally afterward. In addition, the girl said that the tail had grown back almost in a month, just like a lizard's. At first, the prince laughed at this, but later his face stretched and his eyes opened very wide. He assumed Anis wanted him to cure it. Raquel panicked because he had never done anything like that before. The guy thought that if he couldn't do it, he wouldn't be able to be an S-class medic. Clutching his head, our hero realized with horror that such drugs do not even exist. After a little thought, the prince suggested to Anis that he become their public trustee, but the girl didn't understand what that meant. Then Raquel explained that he was using his power and status to support their clan. But Anis immediately cut the idea off and thanked the guy and said she would refuse. The girl said that it would not help them to solve the main problem. She also added that if the boy changed his mind or something happened to him, everything would be the same as before, or even worse. Annie stated that she was not looking for Raquel Adria to get a temporary solution. From these words, our hero thought and asked if the girl hoped to eradicate the problem, and she confidently said yes. In response, the prince sighed heavily and said that he heard her. Anis jumped up with joy and asked if it meant that the boy agreed. The boy confirmed it and said he had no choice. The girl then asked if there was even a way to cure this problem. But Raquel did not give her false hopes and replied that he did not know the exact answer to this question. However, he promised Anis that he would immediately start studying the matter. At that moment, the girl mentally admired Raquel's honesty. The girl thought that if the guy unconditionally guaranteed that he could cure everything, she would be disappointed. After that, Anis got up from the couch and told the prince that she would go and wait for his answer. Raquel was fine with this decision and only asked her not to go far away. Then the door behind the girl slammed shut and Raquel and his two subordinates were left in the office. The guy grabbed his head and thought about the fact that he couldn't miss the chance to attract more than 50 employees to his clinic. In a broken state, he collapsed on the couch and asked himself questions about how he could cure that muscle in their tails that lives on its own. In such musings, after some time, our hero was already sitting in the library. The young man seemed to have searched everything, but found nothing about it. Suddenly, from these thoughts, Raquel Adria was pulled out by a loud and unexpected shout of his healer. The guy was so frightened that the book in his hands simply flew out. Outraged, our hero asked the man if he had done it on purpose, but he said no. Then the prince asked what was the matter. Piero Gardin replied that if the guy will frown in his body will accumulate stress, which can lead to various diseases. In response, the young man said that he would probably get these diseases because the man scares him so much. However, the healer did not consider this option. Our hero was again angered by the fact that Gardin from some time ago began to decide this. The healer did not comment on this, but added that frowning could also cause wrinkles. He added that if they appeared, it would be impossible to get rid of them. The man smiled sweetly and asked the boy not to frown. Raquel Adria didn't answer anything but smiled at Gardin. The prince assumed that the healer was doing all this on purpose to make him feel better. For that, he was grateful to the man. Then, waving his hands, our hero said that if he did get wrinkles, he would inject himself with fillers or Botox. Gardin was surprised because he didn't understand what it was. The young man then explained that such things are great for reducing and preventing wrinkles. After Raquel Adria said that, it was as if it hit him. He realized what he needed. Botulinum toxin is the real full name of Botox. Of all the toxins discovered by mankind to date, it is the most powerful paralyzing poison. The guy remembered the werewolf problem, and he realized that such a substance in them should create a local paralysis effect in the muscles of the tail. Besides, our hero had just the right poison for this purpose. At that moment, Kuzman's appearance appeared in the young man's mind. Raquel then turned to Piero Gardin and said that he needed the capsules of Kuzman's poison. He asked if they were really in the cache. The man was very surprised by such a question from the young man, but answered it anyway. In that case, with a happy smile, the prince asked the healer to bring the capsules to him and lead him to Anis's room. Meanwhile, the girl was in her suite and was deftly doing push-ups. Hearing a knock on the door, she immediately went to open it. When she saw the young man accompanied by Gardine Anis was very surprised that they came to her at such a late hour. The prince entered the room and said that the conversation would be about the condition she had mentioned earlier. The boy said that he seemed to have found a solution to their problem. However, before voicing it, Raquel decided to find out two things first. The first was the area of treatment. Touching Anis's back, our hero noticed that her flow was different from humans. He realized that except for the location of Ren Mai, who was responsible for regulating the flow of qi throughout the body, the rest was very similar. He also noticed that the Changqiang and Yaoshu points in the gluteal region were farther apart than in humans, and between them, a whole new system of veins stretched to the tail, which humans don't have. After this examination, Raquel decided that no further explanation was needed, and his verdict was that the girl looked like a human. The young man then asked Anis if she could turn into a wolf. She was a bit confused by this question. Then the prince explained that the vein changes its position during the transformation and he had to examine everything. At first, the girl thought about it, but after a couple of seconds on her head began to appear wolf ears, and a little later, a full-fledged werewolf stood in front of our hero. Looking at her, Raquel said she wasn't as big as he thought. The boy added that it was more like Tenchil, but the girl didn't know who he meant. So he explained that it was the name of his dog. When Anis heard that, she got a little angry and even growled. Then the boy asked if the girl could not speak now because the structure of her mouth had changed. Without waiting for Anis's answer, he asked for her paw, and the girl surprisingly complied with his request. As soon as the girl realized that the prince was mocking her, she growled again. Taking his hands off Anis, Raquel grinned and apologized to her. However, the young man wasn't done with that either. He pretended to shoot the werewolf and it immediately started tumbling around on the floor. Anis began to growl again. Even Piero Gardine's face smiled as he watched what was happening. After a while, our hero sat in his office. He was thinking about the fact that although the place of treatment had been determined, the second task was still unsolved. In front of Raquel stood a box with capsules of paralytic poison. He didn't understand how much of it to use, and that was the main question. However, he realized that knowing the composition of this poison, he would be able to determine the appropriate dose to treat Anis's tail with Botox. At this point, our hero even thought of asking Kuzman, who was now in prison, about it. But this thought quickly left his head as that man was the #1 villain on his list. The young man didn't trust him at all. Then the boy thought that he could eat the poison himself, store it in a mana circle, and test it. Raquel had already even opened his mouth to put it in his mouth. The organs inside him were raging at this moment. They were all against this decision. Gathered in a circle, the organs couldn't believe that the prince would now test the poison on himself. And of course, they began to decide if this was going to happen, which one of them would detoxify him. Then Liver cried out loudly, as he would be the one who would have to deal with all of this. He was outraged and talked about how it would be better for the guy to summon a monster and have the poison fed to him. Hearing the opinion of his organs, our hero asked if they really wanted him to give poison to a small hedgehog. The young man thought they were too cruel, and the organs responded by raging even more. After all, they thought Raquel was not normal and wanted to experiment on his own body. The liver was the most outraged. He said that there are species that specialize in analyzing ingredients, including poison. Raquel Adria had an epiphany. The guy didn't even know that such species existed. Then Liver said he had seen one when he was in the system waiting room, but the boy didn't understand which system waiting room he was talking about. So the organ said that it was literally a waiting room. He added that he slept there until our hero woke him up. In the same room were the heart, lungs, and others. Then the prince asked if the other organs were there too. Liver confirmed this and said that the same was true of the summoned creatures. Raquel was very interested in such a system, but Liver was not going to tell him anything more because the rules forbade it. However, the guy decided to try his luck and asked the organ what the characteristics of this creature were. He just didn't want to go through that lottery again. But Liver picked his ear and rolled his eyes and said he didn't want to do it. Of course, this upset the young man, and his organs were giggling and enjoying the current situation. This made the boy really angry. Raquel got up from his chair and started to shout in an offended voice that he didn't need their handouts in the form of information. And covering his nose with his hand, the prince said that he would make them tell him everything anyway. The bodies noticed that Raquel was going to hold her breath and started giggling again. At this point, our hero was already blushing. It was obvious that he was already getting heavy. Suddenly, the lungs and the heart fell into the same state. They felt that they lacked oxygen. The liver and large intestine became alarmed. The system told the young man that his organs were perplexed by his actions. The lungs had already fallen to the floor. When liver and large intestine saw this, they started yelling at Raquel. Eventually, to make the prince stop mocking them, they told him the characteristics of the creature he needed. A couple minutes later, a fish appeared in front of Raquel. It deftly began to spin around the guy. Looking at it, Raquel assumed it was a flaming sunfish. Then he turned to the summoned creature and smiled and offered to be his friend. Now our hero had two little animals that were sure to like each other. The boy named the fish Bobop. Then he took out a capsule of poison from the box and handed it to the fish, asking if it wanted to try it. The young man got tricky and said it was delicious. The prince's organs were watching what was happening, and they thought he was a devil in the flesh. In a couple of seconds, the contents of the capsule had already gone into the little fish's mouth, and after that, Bobop immediately felt bad. In her language, she shouted curses in the direction of our hero, but nevertheless, she was very tenacious and began to use her skill. First, the fish collapsed on the floor as it died. A second later, her eyes opened. That was the second skill she used. It's called resurrection. Then Bobop ripped a fin and one fang out of her fragile body, and with a grudge, she started to write something down. Raquel smiled and apologized to the creature. In fact, the fish wrote down in its diary everything it ate. Bobop would write down the exact ingredients, the dosage that could kill, and all the other materials. From the outside, it could even seem as if the fish was snitching on someone. After reading the creature's notes, Raquel realized that the poison was indeed a weak version of Botox. Now our hero could calculate a safe dose that would paralyze Anice's tail. At that moment, the young man called out to Piero Gardin and was frightened again. The man jumped out of nowhere. And then the healer was also frightened. He noticed another small creature on the boy's shoulder and was very surprised by it. Then Raquel again made up a story that the animal had come to him in the middle of the night. It seemed that the young man was now standing there with a nose like Pinocchio. In response, Piero Gardin began to laugh. Seeing this, our hero asked why this was happening. The man replied that he remembered a great man mentioned in a history book. The healer meant Lloyd Frontera, who was an architect and lived in the times when their empire was still a kingdom. The young man knew of such a man, and Gardin said he remembered the record saying that the man had 5 summoned beings. Raquel was surprised and asked if Lloyd Frontier was that cool. The man proudly said that he practically laid the foundation of the empire, and rumor had it the architect was especially popular on Fridays. This was all very interesting, but the man abruptly stopped the conversation and ordered the healer to bring Anis to them, and the man immediately ran to fulfill the order. After a while, the girl was already following Gardin to the office of our hero. On the way to the room, Anis pondered whether the guy could really cure her clan. She had such questions because not even a day had passed since the prince started thinking about a cure. Suddenly, Piero Gardin turned to her. Smiling sweetly, he asked the girl if she was nervous. This question arose in the man's mind as he noticed the serious expression on Anis's face, and the girl sarcastically asked if it was definitely about her face and not her tail. The healer was confused and could not even find the right words. Rubbing his neck, he apologized to the girl. However, after that, Anis smiled and said that she was already used to it, and then she complimented that they hadn't even introduced themselves to each other. They then shook hands and gave their names. The atmosphere became less tense, and the healer asked if he could give the girl some advice. Anis didn't mind that at all. Then Gardin said that he hoped that the prince's treatment would not seem strange to her. That surprised the girl, and the man added that there was a high probability that she would think the boy crazy. At this point, they had already arrived at the right door, and Anis was very curious about what the young man would offer her now. As soon as the doors opened behind them, in a white robe already sat Raquel with 2 of his subordinates. Smiling sweetly, our hero asked the girl to sit down on the couch. Fulfilling the prince's request, Anis asked him if he had found a solution to her problem in just 1 day. Without revealing all his secrets yet, Raquel Adria asked her to just rely on him. However, this made her suspicious, and she asked him to tell her about the treatment first. From this, the guy assumed that the patient was worried. And so he told her that he would first use a barbed needle to pierce her tail in various places. That gave the girl goosebumps. And what the guy said next shocked her. Raquel said he would inject poison under her skin. While our hero was telling his plan of action, he was smiling. He and all his subordinates thought it was very cool, but Anis was of the exact opposite opinion. With round eyes and pale face, she silently turned towards Piero Gardin. In his face, Anis looked for some kind of support, and the man's whole look told her that the girl should trust them to my lord. The same words reeked from the rest of the prince's subordinates. They were saying that Raquel Adria could be trusted. Grabbing her hair, Anis panicked as she realized that everyone in the palace had something wrong with their heads. Noticing the burdened state of his patient, the boy asked her not to hesitate long enough to trust him. Despite the fact that the young man did not look reliable to Anis, she decided to give him a chance. The girl thought that if our hero succeeded in his plan, her clan would no longer suffer for the tales. In that case, Anis decided that even if it was dangerous, it was better to try. And transferring her gaze to Raquel, she said that she agreed to the treatment. Then the guy smiled at her, and with a snap of his fingers, one of his servants brought her a white blanket with a hole for her tail. In a few minutes, a completely naked Anis was lying on the couch. The girl's body was covered with the sheet, and only her tail was peeking out of the hole. Raquel Adria then prepared his hands and was ready to begin. Watching what was happening, his servants marveled at their prince. Walking up to Anis, the guy placed his palm on her lower back and activated the Azrahan method. This method seemed incredible to him as all the acupuncture points really existed. He realized that even thousands of years of experience and knowledge with modern equipment did not allow him to see them. The young man felt the lack of this when practicing traditional medicine. The boy believed in the existence of acupuncture but could not see them. Now he was able to do so with ease. A little happy about this, our hero took out the barbed needles and decided to start the treatment. The prince decided that the first point would be Xuanshu with a depth of 1.5 centimeters. While sticking the needle in there, the young man simultaneously used his slot and released 0.1 of a millimeter of paralyzing poison. Meanwhile, Anis twitched slightly but didn't make a sound. The next point was Ming Meng's point with a depth of 2.1 of a decimeter. Then the guy stuck the needle into Yao Yangquan's point with a depth of 2.4 of a centimeter. After a few minutes, Raquel noticed that the mana that was trying to bypass the Xuanshu point had found its healing direction. It flowed down both sides of the back extensor muscles. Our hero noticed that Anis's tail was losing strength, however. It was only now that things started to happen. With needle in hand, the boy realized that paralyzing the tail was only half the battle. The most important thing was to keep it paralyzed for the rest of its life. At this point, the girl's tail started hitting the young man in the face, and from this, the prince was amazed at the patient's ability to recover. But it was also something Raquel Adria had expected, so he decided it was time to speed up the process. With needle in hand, the young man headed towards Yao Shu's point. And lastly, there was a point on Anise's neck. It was called Nao Kun. Anis was shocked that the prince had just stuck a needle in the back of her head. The girl was perplexed that the young man was prying into her head despite her asking him to stop her tail. After that, our hero only had to watch the tail. The tail twitched for a few seconds, but later fell down without moving. When Raquel Adria saw this, he enthusiastically raised his hands in the air and shouted that everything was ready. Pulling all the needles out of Anis's body, he told her that it was all over and now she could relax. With some hesitation, the girl got up from the couch. She realized that not much time had passed since they had started. Raquel then turned to her and asked if there were any changes in the tail. Anis immediately looked at the tail. The girl was amazed that in her restless state, her tail had not curled up. She noticed that it didn't move at all. Then the young man explained that he had tricked the nerves of her body and paralyzed the tail. When Anis heard this, she was even more shocked, and Raquel added that he had rerouted the nerves in her pinky toe on her right foot. The guy stated that instead of a tail, he would now twitch it. With delight, our hero said that the pinky toe became Anis's new tail. Everyone in the room applauded the prince's successful experiment. However, after a couple seconds, the girl began to whimper, and a little later, tears flowed from her eyes. But the guy was not surprised by this reaction. He realized that it was all the accumulated sadness and resentment the werewolves felt. Raquel thought they would never have to face this again. Anis wiped her tears a little calmer and thanked the young man for his treatment. Then our hero proudly threw back his head and said thanks enough. He added that now it was time to sign the contract. The prince asked the girl if she remembered the special clause. Raquel reminded Anis that she had promised to bring her tribe if he cured her tail. Holding out the pen with the contract to the girl, the guy smiled and asked her to start by signing the contract. At this point, Anis looked at the young man with a sort of wan look. She realized that the crown prince was an unusual person. After a while, our hero and his loyal subordinates stood near the door of the office where many werewolves stood before him. Looking at their tails, the guy laughed uncontrollably. Piero Gardin then turned to the boy and asked if he was really that happy. With delight, Raquel Adria answered yes. After all, the crown prince now had 50 S-ranked medics. In the young man's palace, there were 50 werewolves who were trained in basic nursing and emergency care. They were also given professional nursing courses. The werewolves were also able to recognize medical ingredients, store them properly, and prepare them. Their skills included applying bandages and brewing tonic potions. In the end, the training to run the hospital department was complete. At that moment, one of the werewolves approached our hero and said that they had worked out a new shift schedule. Hearing this, a slight smile appeared on the crown prince's face, since he liked this kind of news very much. Now the traditional medicine clinic of our hero's palace worked 24/7. The boy noticed that the werewolves had apparently gotten used to the moving toe. Everything that was happening pleased Raquel Adria. At that moment, the system said that he had successfully completed the werewolf paralysis procedure. But since this procedure does not prolong life, the young man's skill was not activated. The system also informed the boy that his internal organs were giving him a standing ovation for demonstrating a previously unseen technique. And then it said that the noise caused one of Raquel's internal organs to open its eyes. It was his stomach waking up. He was just a baby, and upon waking up, he immediately started demanding something tasty. The stomach remembered all kinds of tasty dishes and asked our hero to immediately bring him everything. Due to his age, the baby was very capricious, and he felt dizzy from not being allowed to eat. Observing this picture, Raquel Adria was in shock and did not understand where he would get pizza pork and sweet and sour sauce and all that. There was no such thing in the place where they were. With pitying eyes, Acorn said he wanted to enjoy kimbap with tteokbokki sauce. The young man would have liked to have such a meal too, but in their situation there was nothing that could be done. So the little guy asked for at least a candy to treat him. Putting candy in his mouth, our hero thought that he has preferences like a kindergartner. Then the system issued a notification that the kid's stomach was delighted with his birthday present and gave him 300 health points for it. The other organs were also happy about the younger organ and rewarded the prince for it. Raquel now realized that it would become easier to diagnose gastrointestinal diseases. At this point, the system said that due to the precise control demonstrated during the log-cal paralysis procedure, the young man's Asrahan method had improved. The mana amplification was now 150%, and the storage capacity of the mana circle had also increased. As soon as this happened, our hero felt a small water balloon inflate in his chest. He was very happy to have such an amazing amount of pleasantries in the morning. Then one of the medical workers came to Raquel and informed him that the patient from the 6th ward was strange. The young man was puzzled by what he heard and asked what was wrong. And the guy explained that he had a change in body odor and fever. The prince immediately rushed to the sick man. He realized that despite everything, the foundation of traditional medicine had been laid. Meanwhile, in one of the offices sat the chamberlain of the crown prince's palace named Lord Pawar. He was calculating this month's expenses, but suddenly he noticed a discrepancy. When he recalculated everything, he couldn't believe his eyes. Abruptly picking up the journal lying on the table, the man began to tremble. Lord Pawar realized they were finished. Within minutes, the chamberlain of the palace was already breaking into our hero's office. This time, it was not Piero Gardin who frightened the young man with his scream, but another man standing in front of him. Turning to Lord Pawar, the boy asked what had happened. He said that he had come to him with an urgent message. Before telling him everything, he apologized for his late visit. Then the man came closer to our hero and said that it was about the budget for the palace. Lord Pawar said that it would be over soon. Hearing this, Raquel Adria was outraged. The young man angrily jumped up from his seat and asked how they could not have money if he was the crown prince. The boy realized that their affairs were bad because if they didn't have money, he couldn't do anything, and certainly couldn't keep the clinic running. Accordingly, his dream of a long life as a prince would also be shattered. Raquel then asked Lord Pawar why he had no money. Then the chamberlain of the palace expressed his regrets and said that last fall, the guy drastically cut the budget for the palace maintenance. This made our hero go into shock again. The prince began to beat himself on the head and ask why he did so. Garden and Demian standing next to him were surprised that the young man had forgotten about it. After a while, Raquel Adria and Lord Pawar were sitting on the chairs, and the latter told the boy that at the time he believed he didn't have long to live, and that was probably why he had cut the budget. The man added that at that time, 2 days out of 10, the guy could barely move, and then an excessive amount of money was allocated for the upkeep of the palace. Sprawled in frustration on the chair, Raquel Adria suggested that it was karma. And trying to calm His Highness down, the man said that he felt much better now. He thought it was a good thing. But the prince was not of that opinion. The young man lying on the floor said that he was not happy at all. Raquel didn't understand what reasons he could have for being happy if he didn't have a penny. Waving his arms and legs furiously, the boy started shouting that it was all the money's fault again. After a couple of seconds, the young man calmed down, and turning to the second, I asked if the prince was like that. He didn't understand why Raquel had acted that way at that moment, and he didn't understand how the crown prince felt at the time. However, neither did the tears make the situation better. So our hero abruptly knelt down and asked Lord Pawar if they could ask for more funds for the palace this year. But the chamberlain answered in the negative. After hearing this, something broke inside the young man again. He told the man that without money he would have to close the clinic and then he would die. However, Lord Pawar did not understand how this was related to the prince's death and asked the young man about it. Without answering this question, the lad asked again if they would definitely not be able to ask for it, to which the chamberlain replied no and explained that it was against the laws of the empire. He added that the budget for the year could only be requested once at the end of the previous year, and the only person who was not restricted by the law and could do something was the emperor himself. This put a smile back on our hero's face. He decided that he would ask his father for help and rushed to him in a carriage. But after a while, the prince had already returned to his palace. Asterion Testarossa refused to help him. Sitting at his desk in Raquel's office, Adria realized that money was to blame again. Even so, the guy wasn't going to let the clinic close. This time, the prince decided that he wasn't going to let money stop him anymore. He decided to use his only way out of this situation. Our hero turned to Lord Pawar and asked if he had a list of all the palace's assets. A little wary of this question, the man answered yes. With a happy smile on his face, Raquel Adria asked him to carry the list to him. Still not understanding what the prince was up to, the chamberlain decided to ask the young man why he needed it. And without trying to lie and evade the question, our hero answered that he was going to sell everything. He said that the sale would include everything from paintings to statues, and even from gold to silverware. After a while, the guy's plan began to materialize. The paintings were hanging on the walls with the words "sold." Lord Cook watched this with tears in his eyes. He even decided to appeal to the prince and asked him to come to his senses. But Raquel was resolute. At that moment, the man could not stand it, and with shouts that he hated, His Highness rushed away. A couple of days later, Lord Pawar and Damien Kane were standing in our hero's office waiting for his instructions. The young man informed them that they had sold all the luxuries to solve their immediate problems, and he said that despite what had happened, it was a temporary solution. While the chamberlain of the palace stood in tears, the gladiator asked the prince if he was already preparing for the next step, and it was indeed so. The lad said that this little period of respite was very important. He thought that if they couldn't find a stable source of income, the funds would be used up in no time. Wiping away his tears, Lord Pawar told our hero in a pitiful voice that they had nothing more to sell. Raquel knew this very well himself, so he said that from now on, they would sell and make medicines. The eyes of the men rounded up sharply at this. Then the boy smiled wryly and corrected himself. He said he would do it himself. Sometime later in Frontera Square, the owner of one of the stalls approached his subordinate who had failed the test for a medical officer and asked if he had heard the news about the prince's palace. The guy said no. Then the man said that the crown prince had apparently sold all the luxurious items in the palace. This surprised the young man, and he asked why he had to do that. At that moment, there were other people standing next to them, and they told him that only in this case Raquel would be able to maintain the traditional medicine clinic. The boy replayed in his head the words that the prince had sold all the luxuries to help the patients and was even more shocked. His master nodded in response and asked if that didn't make His Highness even more wonderful. In the square, there was talk that our hero was an excellent person. People believed that even in the pages of history books, it was rare to find someone like him. The people of the empire almost idolized the crown prince who wanted to heal everyone, but only they thought so. In reality, Raquel Adria sat in his office thinking that he needed to make as much money as possible to keep the clinic afloat. The prince realized that this was the only way he could survive. At that moment, Damien approached him and asked if he really wanted to create and sell medicines. And Lord Frontier also asked a question. He asked if it wouldn't be easier to charge patients a small fee if money was an issue. But the young man did not consider this option because he thought that because of this, fewer people would come to them. He realized that he needed to take as many patients as possible to prolong his life. The guy said he would never take anything from the clients and was going to make money selling the drugs. Raquel said that he would sell very expensive but effective medicines. The young man added that they will be elite and will only buy them for demonstration. The prince said that if a person was from a family with little wealth and ego, he could be proud of just having such a medicine. Joyfully, Raquel Adria said that these medicines would indicate a person's status in society. With some disbelief, Lord Fronter and Damien Kane asked if such a cure really existed. In response, our hero answered yes, and said that it was a drug that included the gallstone of a minotaur.